parts of Wales as well, and generally just a cloudy and damp end to the day for many places. That rain across Northern Ireland, again falling as rain to lower levels, but perhaps some sleet and snow continuing over any high ground, and for much of Scotland, quite a cloudy end to the day. Those snow showers continuing to pile in across the north and the east through Monday evening. As we then go through the rest of Monday, that area of rain pushes its way eastwards, perhaps causing some disruptive sleet and snow across parts of northern England. It will mostly be falling as rain to lower levels, but we could perhaps see up to 20 centimetres of snow across the Pennines by the time we get to Tuesday morning. So do take care if you are travelling during the morning and keep up to date with the latest warnings on that. Further south, there could be some heavy showers and perhaps not quite as mild as it has been recently under all that cloud and rain. A chilly start for much of Scotland and Northern Ireland on Tuesday morning. Again, we could see some ice in places, and there could just be some sleet and snow lingering along some eastern coast through Tuesday afternoon. But for many of us, it will be a drier and brighter end to the day with plenty of sunny spells around, but with northerly winds, it will definitely be feeling colder than we've seen recently. Only 7 or 8 degrees in the south and perhaps only 3 or 4 degrees further north.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment.
This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory.
Don't miss my big opinion. Mark meets and my take at 10.
Democracy is a funny old thing.
And we don't do boring. Not on my watch. I just won't have it.
Let's go and get another glass of that bubbly. You've earned it.
That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Monday, the 18th of November. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Miriam Cates.
The US President Joe Biden has given the green light for Ukraine to use long-range US missiles to strike targets inside Russia. Is this necessary for the defence of Ukraine, or does it risk escalation? And will Britain follow suit?
And thousands of farmers are set to descend on Westminster this week, rallying against Labour's controversial plans to increase inheritance tax on farm. How will Starmer's government handle this demonstration?
A school sex education course in Scotland is being blamed for the rise in the number of young people questioning their gender identity or experiencing dysphoria. Should transgender ideology be taught in schools?
And masked raiders snuck into Windsor Castle estate as the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children slept in their home nearby. What does this breach in security mean for the future king?
And the Met Office has issued yellow weather warnings for snow and ice across large parts of the UK, with forecasters warning of disruptive snow, or perhaps joyous snow. And, of course, those problems could last until Tuesday. So, should we be dreaming of a white Christmas? And goodness me, it's a busy show today. We're going to be covering lots else besides, including this issue of young people in particular signing off from work due to problems with their mental health.
A large part of the increase in the number of young people not working is 100% down to mental health problems. Obviously, there's a COVID link in there. Lots of people got used to not having to go out, not having to go to school. There also seems to be a social media aspect that is harming people's mental health. But really, are these people, should they just be told to go to work?
Yes, and I suppose there's going to be a balance that has to be struck, but the previous Work and Pensions Secretary did start to dig into this sort of worklessness problem that we are experiencing. It's astonishing that we have such a worklessness problem in the UK, because these are people that are not signed... because the way that the system works, it's not that they're unemployed, it's that they're not expected to work.
So they're receiving benefits, but no expectation
Exactly,
to work.
so you don't see them in the unemployment figures. So the unemployment figures stay really quite low. It looks like we've got very little unemployment. But that's because we're categorising a lot of people who, for all intents and purposes, are unemployed, as if they're not.
There seems to be a real understanding misunderstanding of mental health problems, because, of course, anxiety and depression are real and they affect a lot of people all the time. But sometimes a routine, having to go outside the house, having to think about things that aren't just your problems are actually what can really help people, especially young people. We can't write them off at age 21, 22 and say, well, you never have to work.
Well, there's that and, of course, much more to come besides all throughout the show today on Good Afternoon Britain. And we want your thoughts. Please do get involved. Post your comments by visiting gbnews.com/your say. All that to come, of course, after your very latest news headlines.
Tom, thank you very much and good afternoon. Well, the top story, Sir Keir Starmer says we need to double down on support for Ukraine as President Joe Biden has given the green light to Kyiv to use US-supplied long-range missiles to strike inside Russia. The Prime Minister says Ukraine is top of his agenda at the G20 summit of world leaders and told reporters there's got to be full support as long as it takes. President Vladimir Putin has warned the West they would be playing with fire if they allowed Ukrainian forces to launch Western-supplied cruise and ballistic missiles at Russia, saying it could even trigger a global conflict. It seems a move by North Korea to send thousands of its troops to fight with Russia has changed US calculations and forced Joe Biden into making this decision. Shadow Secretary of State for Defence James Cartledge says the move is justified.
Russia invaded Ukraine, wholly unprovoked, illegal invasion, a dictatorship invading a democracy. So it's been the right thing to do to not be directly involved in Ukraine, but to support them in whatever way we can in terms of providing munitions. That's helped Ukraine to check their advance. But there's been a major development. We talk about escalation. Imagine how the Russians would feel if 10,000 NATO troops were now in Ukraine supporting them. The fact is 10,000 North Korean troops have been deployed into this battle. We understand from the US State Department they've been injected directly into the fight with Russia. That is a major strategic development, and I think in those circumstances this decision is justified.
Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson told GB News the government are committed to helping the Ukrainian people.
We stand steadfast behind the Ukrainian people, behind the Ukrainian government. That was the case under the last Conservative government, and there was cross-party support in the face of Russian aggression for the Ukrainian people. We continue to maintain that position, and as we enter almost the 1,000th day of the conflict, I think it really brings into sharp focus the sacrifices of the Ukrainian people. And the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary, from our point of view, will always continue to keep under review what is necessary by way of military aid for the Ukrainian people.
Well, some breaking news in the last few minutes. That's Sir Keir Starmer says a strong UK-China relationship is important for both of our countries as he met Chinese President Xi Jinping on the fringes of the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. The Prime Minister said earlier on that the size of China's economy and its membership of the UN Security Council meant he wanted to have those serious and pragmatic discussions with the Chinese leader during his time in Brazil. It is the first time a British Premier has met Xi Jinping since 2018. Sir Keir Starmer says he's absolutely confident that the vast majority of farms and farmers will not be affected by changes to inheritance tax announced in the budget. The row over the taxes for farms worth more than £1 million continues as the Prime Minister said last night that the money the government has put into the sector is not to be overlooked. A protest is expected in Westminster tomorrow as farmers rally on Whitehall against the changes announced in last month's budget, while separately the National Farmers Union will hold a mass lobby of MPs in their efforts to get the government to rethink. Yesterday, the head of the Farming Union said that farmers are feeling betrayed about the changes to inheritance tax. Elsewhere, burglars raided the Windsor Castle estate while the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children reportedly slept nearby. The King and Queen were not in the residence. The Sun reported that 2 men are said to have climbed a 6-foot fence at night and stole farm vehicles during the raid last month. They used a stolen truck to break through a gate said to be the nearest exit for the Princess and their children before targeting Shaw Farm, a working farm inside the estate. The pair remain at large. And Tottenham midfielder Rodrigo Bentancur has been given a 7-match ban and fined £100,000 for an alleged racist remark that he made about his South Korean teammate Song Heung-min during an interview. The Uruguayan was charged by the Football Association after the interview, which emerged in June, that showed him being asked by a television host to show the shirt of a Spurs player. Well, he replied, "Sonny's, it could be Sonny's cousin too, as they all look the same." He apologised on Instagram after that remark, saying it was a very bad joke. Bentancur will miss Tottenham's next 7 domestic fixtures. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More news from me in half an hour.
Well, thank you very much, Tatiana. Welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain with Tom and Miriam. It is 12:08 p.m.
Now, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, has approved the use of US long-range missiles by Ukraine to strike targets inside of Russia. This is a decision that has been a long time coming in the eyes of Ukraine. It's been warmly welcomed by both President Zelensky and the embattled Ukrainian army.
Well, all eyes are now on the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, to see whether he will follow suit and allow British Storm Shadow missiles to be used in a similar fashion.
However, the Kremlin has responded with fury at President Biden's decision, accusing Washington of throwing oil on the fire of the conflict.
Well, we're joined now in our studio by GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, is it just a matter of formality now whether or not the British will follow suit?
Yeah, I think it's likely that Britain will, because Britain has been at the forefront in terms of piling pressure on the US to allow for these longer-range missiles to be used deep into Russia, which Ukraine has been calling for some time. Now, that's not an objective from Ukraine's point of view to go after targeting Russia's civilian populations. It's all about going after the airfields where the drones and the jets are launched from to attack Ukraine, going after the ammunition depots and the other fuel depots and supply lines that make the incursion of these Russian forces into Ukraine possible. That's why Ukraine say they need the ability to attack deeper inside Russia, and belatedly, that is now coming, that approval from the US.
Mark, we've been giving this kit for 2 years plus. This is expensive kit. This is kit that we've said is necessary for Ukraine to defend itself. But we've been giving all of this equipment to the Ukrainians and then tying one hand behind their backs. I mean, why has it taken so long to have this decision? And frankly, if we had this political decision made earlier, would this whole war have been a hell of a lot cheaper to fund?
Well, potentially, yes. I was going to use exactly the same analogy, because that's what the Ukrainians must feel they're dealing with here, which is trying to fight a war with one hand, because it's taken them at every step this long drawn-out campaign to get different weapons types. Remember the heavy artillery that it took them a long enough time to get approval for. Then after that, it was the tanks. And Britain again led the way with putting the Challenger 2 tanks into Ukraine, and then allies followed suit after that. And then it was the fast jets. Again, Britain at the forefront of that, saying that they were going to train the fast jet pilots here in the UK and provide that training overseas to them as well. Now, of course, they're getting their F-16s, they're getting the fast jets, but of course we've had this argument now for many months over whether they can use the long-range missiles that, you're right, they already have in theatre, in country in Ukraine, that they can use in Ukraine. They've been using, for instance, the UK-provided Storm Shadow missiles to good effect, taking out lots of ships of the Russian Baltic Fleet over in the ports in Crimea, because that's classed as within Ukraine. They can be used for that. But now, of course, they'll be able to go after these supply lines deeper into Russia, which will have an effect. But it comes awfully late in the campaign, with Russia gaining ground all the time.
Many people will worry that if this war is escalated from the Ukrainian side through the use of more NATO weapons, Russia will just escalate in response. And certainly we've heard from Donald Trump's camp this morning, they are very worried about what Biden is doing here, that he's just escalating the war, knowing that the new incumbent, Donald Trump, actually wants to dial things down. Is there a risk that this will just increase the casualties, increase the cost of the war, whilst not actually providing any tactical solutions?
Well, potentially, but, you know, if you support Ukraine and its efforts to try to push Russia, the invader, out of its country, then you've got to give it, you would imagine, the support, the equipment that it needs to fulfill that particular endeavour. And then, you know, it's up to Russia to try to meet that in kind if they can. It's going to be a huge drain. It is a huge drain on Russian resources as well. And I'm sure that at some point they may welcome an intervention from Donald Trump to get the parties around the table again to try to come up with the compromise which will inevitably be needed here to end this bloody 3-year-long conflict.
And in a funny sort of way, it is actually thanks to Donald Trump that now the Ukrainians are able to fire their missiles into Russia. Does anyone really believe Joe Biden wouldn't have made this decision today if everyone wasn't looking to the 21st of January when Donald Trump is inaugurated, when he takes back the reins? Almost we've got this now mad dash, perhaps from both sides, to try and get in the best possible position for that inevitable negotiation, which will begin, well, in January.
Yeah, and it's to get in the best position ahead of the Trump administration, but also the winter. The winter sets in hard and deep there in Ukraine. So the gains that are made are normally made during the sort of the summer months and the better weather. But if they can push, and Russia continues to push, they gained yet another village in the Donetsk region in the south of Ukraine. And all of the while they're pushing, it's minor incursions, but they're pushing that bit further into Ukrainian territory. That's more territory they hold. That's more of a bargaining chip that they have to bring to the table. From Ukraine's point of view, they want to keep pushing them back. They want also to hold on to the Kursk, some of the gains they've made in the Kursk region of Russia. They've pushed in there, remember, and I think the use of these long-range missiles will enable them to take out some of the supply lines against the very significant offensive, counter-offensive that's being planned by Russia in the coming weeks.
And of course that all involves North Korean troops as well, which adds a whole other sort of dimension to the escalation and the fear of all of this. Mark White, thank you very much for those very latest updates.
Well, masked men attempting to raid Windsor Castle while Prince William, Princess Catherine and their children were asleep nearby. That's according to the Sun newspaper.
Yes, 2 men are understood to have scaled a 6-foot fence at night to steal farm vehicles. Well, Thames Valley Police confirmed a burglary at the property on the Crown Estate back in October.
Well, GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker joins us now. Cameron, this was quite a serious security breach, wasn't it? There's no assertion that there was any attempt on the lives or the safety of the Prince and the Princess. This was just a burglary, but clearly calls into question what the police response was.
Yeah, it certainly does, and it is, as you say, a potential very serious breach in terms of the security here in the Windsor Castle perimeter. And as you point out, Shaw Farm, which is a working farm within the Windsor Castle guarded perimeter, was the target. The 2 masked men making off with a quad bike and a pickup truck, smashing through Shaw Farm Gate, which is the gate very near to Adelaide Cottage, where the Prince and Princess of Wales and their 3 children were sleeping at about 11:45 p.m. on the 13th of October. But it does, of course, call into question this wider issue of security. The Sun on Sunday reporting that armed police, both at King Henry VIII Gate here behind me and Shaw Farm Gate, which is the other side of the Windsor Castle estate, the permanent presence of armed police has actually ceased. One, because they fear it could, according to the Sun, scare tourists. The second one, there aren't actually enough armed police to go around to guard the property. But we do understand that there are armed police wandering the grounds 24/7 and during changing of the guard here at King Henry VIII Gate. So Thames Valley Police are investigating the incidents that took place. As far as we're aware, no arrests have taken place so far. The King and Queen were not in residence at the time. The King was in Scotland, and the Queen was thought actually to be in a spa in India ahead of the Australian and Samoa visits. But this is the latest from a long line of incidents here at Windsor Castle, because back in February, a man was arrested for trespass very, very close to the King's apartments here inside Windsor Castle. He's been subsequently sectioned under the Mental Health Act. And then if you remember back in December 2021, on Christmas Day, a man with a crossbow entered the Windsor Castle grounds and told police he was here to kill the Queen. Now, he has subsequently been sentenced to treason, and he's currently in a mental health hospital. But because the armed police has been taken away, because this is the permanent armed police has been taken away, and because this is the latest incident in this quite unstable world at the moment, this latest incident that has been leaked and reported in the Sun newspaper this morning has raised this wider point: is there enough protection for members of the royal family here at Windsor Castle in the face of quite an unstable world?
It is astonishing, Cameron, that you're saying all of this, whereas behind you are what appears, at least to the public, to be some of the strongest fortifications in the land, the turrets and the stonemasonry of Windsor Castle itself, built, of course, not only to impress, but to defend. And now we're sort of in this situation where we've got police who perhaps 100 years ago might have shot first and asked questions later. It seems we're very much in that other, we're through the looking glass perhaps to the other extent. There'll be questions raised about how gentle, quite frankly, some of our policing tends to be.
Yeah, I mean, parts of this castle, Tom, date back 1,000 years. The bit behind me dates back to Tudor times, I believe. But as you say, I mean, it's heavy fortifications of King Henry VIII Gate. At the moment, no armed guards. There's 2 police officers on the gates. There were for around 45 minutes earlier on this morning some armed police, but they have subsequently left. And as you say, it does kind of raise this point that we are living in the 21st century where there are all kinds of threats. But I think it's very important to stress that this was just a masked burglary, and their target was just the farming equipment. It was not the Prince and Princess of Wales and their 3 children, although of course they were thought to be, because it was a Sunday evening in residence at the time in Adelaide Cottage. But I think there will be certainly questions being asked of both Thames Valley Police and the Metropolitan Police, who are responsible for the protection of members of the royal family and indeed the Prime Minister and government ministers. Is there enough to protect them in times like this?
Yeah, some severe questions there. Cameron Walker, thank you very much for joining us outside Windsor, which also is just a very impressive architectural place to present television from.
It is
do it more often.
And one of the things people love about the royal family is that they kind of are living in Windsor, not among people, but near people, and it would be a real shame if it had to be covered with barbed wire and much more intense security, so let's hope it was a one-off. Well, Sir Keir Starmer has said that strong UK-China relationship is important for both of our countries, as he met Chinese President Xi Jinping on the fringe of the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro.
Well, here are some live pictures from the G20 Leaders Summit in Brazil. Of course, the Prime Minister said we want relations to be consistent, durable, respectful, and, as we have agreed, avoid surprises where possible. He added, a strong UK-China relationship is important for both our countries and for the broader international community.
The UK will be a predictable, consistent, sovereign actor committed to the rule of law.
Well, goodness me, this is interesting words there from the Prime Minister. Perhaps a cosier Chinese relationship.
Yes, he's very concerned about human rights breaches when he was the leader of the opposition. Will he be raising those, do you think?
I suspect there'll be a form of words found to perhaps highlight but not offend.
Indeed.
Well, we'll be covering more on this Starmer, just about the opposite of Trump. Starmer-Xi Jinping meeting later on in the show. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Well, thousands of farmers are set to descend on Westminster this week, rallying against Labour's controversial plans to impose inheritance tax on farms. Lots more coming up on today's show. Stay tuned.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
What do you think?
Morning. I think we have failed young drivers as a society, and we need to train them better and train them earlier. I think that the idea of stopping them carrying passengers for 6 months is a good idea because you've got peer pressure within a car. So yes, but I think graduated licenses are really difficult. You've got what we call the 3 E's, which is education, educating kids to drive earlier, and engineering, which is making roads better and safer, and then comes enforcement at the end of it. So I think we're failing in these two first ones, the education and the enforcement. I put my kids, all three of them, through a thing called a Young Driver, which allows under 17s to drive on private land with ADI instructors and learn the craft of driving and all the below the dashboard stuff and hazard awareness long before they try and do this very compressed period of time to learn about driving. I think we're failing them. So I want to see it in schools, and I want to see them being taught much, much earlier.
Nobody's actually pointing the finger of blame, I think, at the young driver, but maybe young drivers don't understand how different it is. You feel you can drive, you've passed your test, and then a load of your friends get in the back, and suddenly the mood is different, the pressure on you as a driver is very different, showing off, just larking around and having a great time. Aisha, how do you feel about the fact that clearly young drivers do need to be protected almost from themselves, don't they?
Well, I do agree with some of what Quentin has just said, especially about starting early and especially about getting young people used to the dangers of being on the road.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 24 minutes past midday. Now, thousands of farmers are set to descend on Westminster this week, rallying against Labour's controversial plans to impose a family tax on family farms.
Well, the policy revealed in the recent budget has sparked outrage across rural Britain, with critics accusing the government of being out of touch with countryside communities.
Well, we're going to be discussing this with our reporter, Adam Cherry, in just a moment. He's busy in Downing Street for us. He's been talking with the Prime Minister's official spokesman, because this is a big headache for the government. I think generally when you're in power, there are certain groups that you really don't want to upset. Generally pensioners, a big, powerful voting lobby, but also then there are groups that are perhaps not large in number, but great in sympathy. And people can really relate to the plight of people like farmers.
That's right.
Who do a really tough job.
Yes, and I think Labour have fallen into the trap of thinking that ordinary people at home will think farmers are really rich landowners and don't deserve any sympathy. But people like Jeremy Clarkson have done an awful lot to change those prejudices, if they ever existed, showing how difficult it is to make money, how hard farmers work. And the polling shows that people are overwhelmingly in support of farmers and against this tax, even though it, as you said, affects very few people.
Well, fresh out of Downing Street now, let's speak with Adam Cherry, our reporter. Adam, firstly on this issue of the family farm tax, is the government braced for a day of, well, potential chaos tomorrow?
Afternoon, guys. Chaos, well, I wouldn't describe it as chaos, but they're certainly concerned. I've just, as you say, come out of the Downing Street briefing. And the first question they asked actually was, are you not worried that the Prime Minister isn't even in the country whilst this is all happening? He's, of course, at the G20 in Rio, and he said, or rather the spokesperson said, that the G20 is important for cooperation, it's key to delivering for British people and for global leadership, specifically on the farmers and what they're demanding and their reaction to that levy imposed, or the inheritance tax levy imposed at the budget. They said it's important to support farmers. The £5 billion over the next 2 years is crucial to that. It's the largest sum over a 2-year period ever in a budget, plus the flooding support and
sorry to interrupt here, Adam, but the government's response...
That's how they're selling it.
The government's response here, they're taking money away from farmers, and that's going to the Treasury, and then the Treasury is going to give money too far. I mean, this is a carousel. I mean, I can think of a more effective way to sort of make farmers, you know, better off, and that's not take their money away from them and then give it back in various subsidies. Why not just not take their money away from them in the first place?
Well, it's a good point, Tom, isn't it? And they were also asked, this raises basically a rounding error for the NHS budget. It raises about 400 million, so why bother inflicting all this pain and political damage? And they say, well, this policy went through all the usual budget processes with the Treasury and DEFRA and so on. 73% of farms will not be affected. It's a difficult decision that is fair, balanced and proportionate. Well, if you think that, I'd imagine you might have a different view tomorrow when everyone is marching on Westminster and Downing Street.
Well, Adam, there does seem still to be this argument about the facts of this issue, because the government is still saying that this will affect relatively few farms. They've been quite patronising to farmers, saying they should just calm down and read the details. But of course, the Farmers Union and accountants who support farmers are saying that actually this will affect so many family farms, because there are plenty of farms that are worth a lot of money on paper and yet are very, very cash poor. Who is right in this argument?
Well, I mean, it's a good question, isn't it? Because it looked like the DEFRA had different figures to the Treasury, and there are reports that the Environment Secretary, Steve Reed, who is meeting with NFU farmers and their leadership today and perhaps tomorrow as well, he was arguing with the Treasury over this, and there was a bit of a civil war over it. So it's not entirely clear who's right. It certainly looks like the farmers think that the Treasury have got it totally wrong. And as I say, if they think 73% of farmers aren't affected by this, you have to wonder why there are so many who are absolutely furious about it and who will be here tomorrow. It's not as if this is a small issue for them. It's certainly not.
Absolutely, it's one to keep our eyes on. But of course, there's another scandal in British politics that is rumbling along, and that is just how truthful has the Chancellor been on her own CV. Did Downing Street have anything to say about that?
Well, sort of. They said, refer you to the Treasury and the Downing Street. Their political colleagues will have more to say on that. They then went on the usual routine talking about the £22 billion black hole and how the Chancellor has restored financial stability and they needed to do that and blah, blah, blah. We've heard all this before, but on the specific point, did the Chancellor embellish her CV and is that a breach of the ministerial code? It's keeping a distance there, saying, talk to someone else. The spokesperson specifically said she hadn't asked the Prime Minister about this, which seems a little bit odd, given it was all over the papers over the weekend. You'd think they might have found a couple of minutes to have a chat about it and figure out a strategy. But apparently not. So that's the latest on that one. No comment on whether it's a breach of the ministerial code, but rest assured, she has restored financial stability, and that's what people really care about, according to Downing Street.
Well, I think plenty of people would question her capability as an economist, but obviously this is a different question. I mean, we need to make clear, don't we, Adam, that LinkedIn is not a CV. It is a record of your employment history, but it's a lot more than that. It's a social networking site. People use it to post tweets about posts about their life, like they might do other social networking. It's not a CV. There's no implication that she's actually lied when trying to get a job, is there?
Well, no, but I wouldn't say it's a particularly good look, is it? There's been that according to the Guy de Fawkes website, that claim that she was an economist at the Bank of Scotland was there for a very long time and then mysteriously vanished while she was Chancellor. So she or someone in her team changed it while she was in the Treasury. Now, fine, it might not be necessarily violate some sort of law, right? But the spirit of it, given that this government came in on the promise of transparency and continue to say that that's their central mission, transparency, honesty, openness. While changing your CV, fine, it's an online CV, but doing so nonetheless, whilst you're Chancellor, I would suggest the public will not look too kindly on that. And the fact that they don't really have a great answer for it today, other than, well, I haven't spoken to the Prime Minister about this, doesn't bode well either, I would suggest.
Very, very strange, Adam, as you say, that there was no sort of line to give, that they didn't sort of row in directly behind the Chancellor. You might expect a more full-throttle defence of the Chancellor in her position at a briefing like this. But Adam Cherry, live from Downing Street, thanks so much for joining us here on Good Afternoon Britain. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We're going to go straight over to Rio de Janeiro now, where there are live pictures we can see of leaders arriving at the G20 summit. I believe that's Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, walking down the red carpet in a European flag-style blazer. It's sort of EU blue with buttons that could match the stars.
I wonder if they actually are stars. Very interesting, yes. And we're expecting lots more G20 leaders to be arriving for this very important summit. And of course, what's made the headlines here today in the UK is what Starmer is going to say to the Chinese president. Are we going to see a warming of that relationship with the Labour government?
Really interesting stuff. The leaders of the world, all in a rather sunny Rio de Janeiro. And I do feel sorry for some of these leaders, some of whom are not spring chickens. Of course, Joe Biden will have to be doing this really long upper slope. I mean, how long is this red carpet that they're all being made to do one by one? It's not the most efficient way to get inside.
It's almost like a challenge. Can you walk uphill in a straight line?
Donald Trump might struggle. We know how he's with slopes. He might need to. But of course, he's not at this summit, not president for another couple of months. But we will be, of course, joining the G20 summit as and when we see interesting things.
Well, on the topic of Donald Trump, there are reports that the new president-elect's team are looking at plans to deport illegal migrants to Rwanda. Well, all on that after the news with Tatiana.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. The top stories whilst the Keir Starmer says we need to double down on support for Ukraine as President Joe Biden has given the green light to Kyiv to use US-supplied long-range missiles to strike inside Russia. However, Downing Street has refused to reveal whether the UK would change its position and allow Ukraine to launch British long-range missiles deep into Russia after that move by the US. The Prime Minister says Ukraine is top of his agenda at the G20 summit of world leaders who have been arriving in the last few moments. And he also told reporters there's got to be full support as long as it takes. President Vladimir Putin has warned the West they would be playing with fire if they allowed Ukrainian forces to launch Western-supplied cruise and ballistic missiles at Russia, saying it could even trigger a global conflict. It seems a move by North Korea to send thousands of its troops to fight with Russia has changed US calculations and forced the US president into making this decision. Shadow Secretary of State for Defence James Cartledge says the move is justified.
Russia invaded Ukraine, wholly unprovoked, illegal invasion, a dictatorship invading a democracy. So it's been the right thing to do to not be directly involved in Ukraine, but to support them in whatever way we can in terms of providing munitions. That's helped Ukraine to check their advance. But there's been a major development. We talk about escalation. Imagine how the Russians would feel if 10,000 NATO troops were now in Ukraine supporting them. The fact is 10,000 North Korean troops have been deployed into this battle. We understand from the US State Department they've been injected directly into the fight with Russia. That is a major strategic development, and I think in those circumstances this decision is justified.
Sir Keir Starmer says a strong UK-China relationship is important for both of our countries as he met Chinese President Xi Jinping on the fringes of the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. The Prime Minister said the size of China's economy and its membership of the UN Security Council meant he wanted to have serious and pragmatic discussions with the Chinese leader during his time in Brazil. Now, it's the first time a British Premier has met him since 2018. Elsewhere, burglars raided the Windsor Castle estate while the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children reportedly slept nearby. The King and Queen were not in the residence. The Sun reported that two men are said to have climbed a 6-foot fence at night and stole farm vehicles during the raid last month. They used a stolen truck to break through a gate said to be the nearest exit for the Prince and Princess and their children before targeting Shaw Farm, a working farm inside the estate, while the pair remain at large. And some breaking news to bring you this hour. TV presenter Davina McCall has made an enormous leap forward in the last 24 hours. That coming from her partner as he posted that update on Instagram. Michael Douglas has thanked well-wishers, adding that Davina has made an enormous leap and she is out of ICU and is loving awareness. Thank you. The post also featured an image saying massive relief to see some light breaking through. 57-year-old Davina had revealed in a video post on Instagram earlier on Friday that she had a benign brain tumour, a colloid cyst, which she described as very rare. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More news from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello, very good day to you. Here's your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office on what is going to be a fairly cold and perhaps wintry day for some of us. We do have some sunny weather around across northern parts today, and with that we have some cold air here. Further south and west, it's a milder story, but also quite a cloudier and wetter story. And as the wet weather across the south and west hits the colder air, we are going to see something wintry later on. But for the time being, through this afternoon, lots of sunny skies across northern and eastern UK. Across the far north of Scotland, some wintry showers, some sleet or snow piling its way in. A cloudier story towards the south and west with quite a bit of rain around, but it is milder here. Temperatures for some peaking around 13 or 14 Celsius, only a few degrees above freezing towards the north and east. Now, as we head into this evening, there are a few things to watch out for. Across the north of Scotland, we will continue to see some wintry showers. These could become more of a thing overnight, so some hazards associated with these. A drier end to the day across southern Scotland and the far northeast of England, but we have that wet weather coming in from the southwest. That's going to bring some snow across parts of Northern Ireland and also across parts of northern England as we go through the end of today and overnight. It is likely to be quite disruptive for some places. We're talking potentially 20 centimetres above 200 to 300 metres, so some cities, Leeds, Sheffield, could see some disruptive snow overnight. Further south, there will be some wet weather around, but it's staying milder here, so I'm expecting it really just to be rain, with temperatures for some staying above 10 Celsius, but in the north with some clear skies, a harsh frost, -8 perhaps. As we go through tomorrow, we are going to see a lot of the wet and wintry weather clearing away towards the east, so turning drier for many of us, but some rain continuing towards the southwest and further sleet and snow showers piling into northern Scotland. Temperatures will actually be dropping a little bit as we go through the day, so it is going to feel pretty chilly for many of us, despite there being some sunshine around. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel. Long delays for the anti-clockwise side of the M25. There are 2 lanes closed to a broken down lorry following an earlier accident just after 26 for Waltham Abbey. Delays to 27. Clockwise on the M25, traffic is easing following an earlier broken down lorry just before Enfield at 25. London bound on the M20, the exit slip road to junction 12 is partially blocked due to a broken down vehicle. Recovery work is taking place. Northbound on the M5, all lanes have now reopened following an earlier vehicle needing a tyre changed between Bridgewater South through to Bridgewater North at junction 23. An earlier lane closure for the M4 across the Prince of Wales Bridge has cleared between junctions 22 and 23, and traffic now on the move for the M4. So that's your latest travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It's 12:40, and there are reports that Donald Trump's team are looking at plans to deport illegal migrants to Rwanda. Following the scheme that was drawn up by the last Conservative government here in the UK, the US president-elect is reportedly considering a number of different countries to send illegal immigrants to.
Well, a source close to Trump's team has said that he campaigned on a promise to crack down on illegal immigration, and he's determined to stick to it.
Well, joining us to discuss this is assistant comment editor at The Telegraph, Poppy Coburn. Poppy, thanks for joining us. This is a strange sense of déjà vu. The Labour government here in the UK has ditched the Rwanda plan, but Trump looks like he's going to revive this. Is this just speculation, or is there a chance that this might actually happen?
Well, there has actually been some slight confirmation that came today from a man called Tom Homan, who is on Trump's immigration crack team. He was the man, you may remember, who authored the family separation policy, who is now being leaned on quite heavily. He said, seems like lots of people think this is a good idea. I have to say, the ultimate winner here is clearly Paul Kagame. I mean, Trump wrote The Art of the Deal, but I cannot think of a better deal maker than him. He's already taken hundreds of millions of pounds from the British government that then in the end was blocked by our Supreme Court. But it actually looked like if Trump does decide to go the third-party route, and there are many reasons why he may want to do that, namely, he won't have the problem of people being deported and then coming back in a few months, walking back up that southern border. Rwanda would be the perfect place to send them, not only because of the geographical distance, but because, as the UK government has paid for it, all of the processing facilities are actually already there. There's already a framework in place. The government is already on board with the decision. This could potentially be something that is a massive, massive early win for the Trump administration if they do decide to go forward with it.
That is fascinating. It's not quite building a wall and making Mexico pay for it. It's more having the Brits build a whole bunch of facilities in Africa, letting them pay for it, and then swooping in at the last possible minute. I suppose the big advantage for the United States, if you want to call it that, is that there's no ECHR membership. They don't sit under a higher court that could prevent a sovereign decision of the US government deciding to deport people.
Exactly. And I think it's also worth keeping in mind the scale of illegal immigration into America at the moment. I mean, they currently have 20 million illegal migrants in the country. They've had millions coming just under the Biden administration. We think our problems are bad. The scale that they have is much, much greater. What I think the Trump administration has been very good at is understanding and communicating to voters that this scale is simply unacceptable. He's mentioned the murder of Laken Riley, who was allegedly murdered by a South American illegal migrant, and will be able to say, because they are not stopped by these international law treaties in the same way the United Kingdom is, which is, by the way, the reason we did Rwanda in the first place. We thought we could essentially contravene the ECHR through that. His view will not be, we're going to fiddle around with international law. It will be, how do we get these illegal migrants as far away from our sovereign territory as possible, and essentially circumvent everything that the European Union has been trying to do, or Britain outside of the European Union has tried to do, and essentially just deal with the problem altogether. And I think it's pretty fantastic, very, very clever, and potentially save them a hell of a lot of money.
Poppy, you mentioned the scale of this problem in America, and I think since the beginning of Joe Biden's term, 10 million illegal immigrants are thought to have come across the border. So it's not, of course, it's not the intention to try and deport everybody. That would be completely impossible. But the idea is to set up a deterrent so that people believe that were they to come into America illegally, they would be immediately deported, which is, of course, exactly the same reasoning behind the previous Conservative government's plan. Whereas the left, Keir Starmer, seem to think that we can pay people or incentivise people to stay in their own countries. Is this a kind of good snapshot of the difference between left and right in their view on immigration?
Absolutely, and you've got it completely right with the importance of this deterrent effect. You know, Trump has got a lot of criticism already for his plan of mass deportations. People say, well, it's simply not feasible. You can't round up millions of people using ICE, their immigration removal services. That can't happen. The point is, if you get rid of enough people, if you send them somewhere like that third country, Rwanda, that is obviously going to have a massive knock-on effect on people coming up the southern border. That is true in America as it's true in the United Kingdom. Of course, the difference is that America, when they say they'll go through with it, with this properly right-wing Trump administration, they probably will actually go through with it because they are not having to deal with the problem of the ECHR. As far as I'm aware, they don't really care about the UN Secretary on their refugee rights from 1951. They're going to say whatever works, works. So ultimately, I think this is going to turn out to be a lot more successful for them than it was in the United Kingdom, because again, they have a problem with left-wingers intervening. It's not to say that they are not going to have massive pushback from NGOs, massive pushback from people working in the aid sector. But of course, they have complete control of the Supreme Court now, massive Republican majority in the Supreme Court. They have the House, they have the Senate, and they obviously have the executive. And so if anybody can get this done, it's going to be the Trump administration. And we here in Europe should really be watching and seeing what works, seeing what necessarily doesn't, and moving forward, because we cannot afford to be left behind on this issue, essentially.
It's fascinating how, of course, it is possible for the US president to enjoy a Supreme Court that has a majority of nominees from Republican presidents. Of course, that's never, ever going to be the case in the United Kingdom because you don't have political appointees, although perhaps we do have political appointees that just aren't chosen by politicians. Poppy Govan, thanks so much for joining us, assistant comment editor at The Telegraph.
Well, now it's time for our poll of the day. Today we're asking, do you think Donald Trump is right to adopt Britain's ditched Rwanda plan?
Yes, we'll be bringing you the live results throughout the day, so make sure to stay tuned. And, of course, you can join in that poll by scanning the QR code on your screen right now.
And the final result will be announced later in Martin Daubney's show. And for all our latest polls, news and how to vote, just go to gbnews.com/poll.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. And road accidents are now the leading cause of death amongst teenagers across the globe, according to the World Health Organization. Well, we're going to be diving into that query later in the show.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This week is Chocolate Week, the ultimate celebration of everything rich, sweet and indulgent.
Yes, and we now have the best person in the studio with us to satisfy all of your chocolate cravings. We're joined now by master chocolatier Ollie the Choc. Ollie, really good to see you this morning.
Thank you for having me.
And you brought some of your chocolate in with you.
I did. I brought some tasting samples. You're very welcome to help yourself.
So what have you got here? Tell us.
So this is my signature chocolate. I call it the Holy Grail. It's got sea salt flakes, crushed Oreo, caramel fudge pieces, very Moorish.
I love a caramel and salt combo, just, you know. I feel like you see it everywhere now. Look,
you won't be disappointed.
Look, I want everyone to see a close-up of this one. Can we get a shot on this one? So this is Oreo, there we are, caramel and salt. Do you want to try some?
You go first.
Help yourselves. And then this bar of chocolate is a little bit of a wild card. That's a mystery flavour, so...
OK, I love a mystery.
I'm not going to tell you what that is.
Hold on this one. This one's amazing.
Are you?
Oreo, caramel.
That's my biggest seller.
I'll keep my palate clean for this. So this is a mystery flavour.
You've got to guess what that is.
Is that a nut in there, I see? Right, here we go. Ready?
I'm not saying anything.
Talk us through.
Very crunchy.
For me, I'm all about textures in chocolate.
Me too.
It has got a good crunch to it, hasn't it? It's not the kind of flavour that you would expect.
Oh, I can't get it.
Is it sweet? Is it salty?
No, it's salty, yeah.
It's
OK,
salty.
hang on, bit more.
OK.
Bit more.
I mean, just keep going.
Is it crisps? Wait,
It is crispy, it's crunchy. Could it be crisps?
I think it could be crisps. Yeah, it's crisps.
So what flavour?
Salt and vinegar. Cheese and onion.
Yes, nailed it. You know.
Oh, you're much better than me.
Love that.
Do you know what? I think I've got a bit of a cold, so my taste buds are
Oh,
off.
you're going to blame that, are you?
That's my excuse. That's delicious.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 to 1. We're going to go straight to Rio de Janeiro because Keir Starmer, there he is, our Prime Minister, has just arrived at the G20 summit. There he is meeting President Lula of Brazil, the veteran left-winger. And now we've lost the pictures of the Prime Minister. Clearly, that's all the time he got. But, of course, we will be dipping in to the G20 summit throughout the day here on GB News.
And earlier we saw Ursula von der Leyen, who's the President of the European Union. We saw her walking up that very long red carpet with quite a long incline. They also have to walk up in front of the world's press. It's some sort of trial, I think. Of course, this is the G20 summit, getting together all the leaders of the world's largest economies to discuss various economic and security issues, and headlines today that Keir Starmer will be discussing trade with China when he meets Xi Jinping.
On the fringes of the G20 summit, Number 10 keen to ensure that this isn't sort of a formal diplomatic meeting, but the Starmer-Xi Jinping meeting is sort of a more casual affair, but perhaps recognises a thawing of relationships between the UK and China. That's a really interesting point because there are some big concerns, not just on the sort of almost imperialist outreach of China, grabbing islands and all the rest of it, but also the human rights of that country.
And there we go, you've got Starmer meeting Xi Jinping here. Of course, a lot of people will be asking, what is the point of these meetings? Are they just a very expensive opportunity to drink a lot of champagne and hobnob with other world leaders? But at the end of the day, it's all about relationships in politics, isn't it? If you know people well, you're more likely to be able to do deals. I mean, look back to Thatcher and Reagan. That was an incredibly important relationship for the world.
Absolutely, and it will be interesting to see how these different relationships evolve and develop. Of course, many European leaders at this summit, but also leaders from perhaps parts of the world that are growing rather more quickly. Keir Starmer will have a choice here. Does he want to hang out with Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden, or does he want to hang out with Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz? He's got that east-west choice between him.
Well, and not just Western countries. We've got South Africa, Mexico, Indonesia, all part of the G20. So some emerging economies as well as some older powers.
And it looks like Olaf Scholz, speak of the devil, has just arrived. An interesting point about this particular summit is that both Olaf Scholz and Joe Biden and a couple of the others here are likely to be out of office fairly soon. Olaf Scholz, his government has collapsed, his coalition partners have withdrawn, and there are fresh elections in the new year. So this could be his last big international event, which is, I suppose, not ideal for him, but also not ideal for Keir Starmer, whose first overseas trip in Europe was to go and meet Olaf Scholz, have a joint press conference with Olaf Scholz. He'd, of course, as leader of the opposition, been seeing this man, Olaf Scholz, on a number of trips. He sees sort of their political projects as very aligned, although it does seem that perhaps the German people are not particularly happy with the political projects.
It'll be very interesting to see what happens in those German elections. Big rise of popularity for the right-wing parties. See what happens. Will it be in a repeat of what's happened in America?
Well, of course, I think that even though Olaf is likely to lose those elections and lose them badly, his party will still end up in government because of the proportional representation system that Germany has. They'll end up in some sort of grand coalition.
Indeed. A warning to us all.
This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more to come, so don't go anywhere. But of course, before we get more of the action around the world, here's a look at the latest weather forecast.
A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. There's some pretty cold weather across parts of the UK at the moment, and with that there's the risk of some disruptive snow as we go through the next 24 hours because a frontal system is going to push in and bump into the cold air currently across many northern parts, leading to the rain turning to snow. Already as we go through the end of the afternoon, some snow over higher ground of Northern Ireland, but it's across parts of northern England where we're likely to see the greatest disruption from the snow, potentially 20 centimetres of lying snow above some higher ground, even a little bit to lower levels potentially. Further north, some wintry showers for northern Scotland, some clearer skies across other parts of Scotland, leading to a harsh frost here, temperatures perhaps falling as low as -8, but it's a milder, albeit cloudier and perhaps damp story further south. As we go through tomorrow morning then, those wintry showers could bring a bit of sleet, bit of snow, also some icy patches, so some difficult conditions first thing. A drier story though across more central and southern parts of Scotland. And by the morning, most of the wet and wintry weather will have cleared through Northern Ireland, and it will be clearing away from parts of northern England too. Further south, it's a milder start to the day. There will be some outbreaks of rain, but again, most of that will be clearing away towards the east as we go through the morning. A lot of dry weather then following in behind, and things should turn a bit sunnier as well for many places, especially towards the north. But towards the southwest here, there will be some outbreaks of rain around, and some of them could be a little bit on the heavy side. We will see our temperatures actually dropping for some places as we go through the day. A real chilly feel to things, and with some brisk winds coming in from the north, it is going to feel particularly cold indeed. We stick with that northerly wind as we go through the end of the day, so still some wintry showers, particularly across northern parts of Scotland, but also parts of Northern Ireland too, and anywhere exposed to that northerly wind. And that's the theme as we go through the rest of the week, really. A cold feel with some wintry showers at times. Bye-bye.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Welcome back to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Well, drinkers have been warned about a drop in the quality of French wines after poor weather conditions hit this year's grape harvest. Winemakers across France will make 240 million fewer bottles of wine this year, the country's farming ministry said on Tuesday. So should we think of switching from French to English? I'm joined now by sommelier and founder of Inflorescence Wines, Jacinta Madison-Williams. Hello, Jacinta.
Good morning.
Nice to see you. First of all, let's just think about the poor French.
We should.
Has this been a fairly universal weather catastrophe for France?
It has. Kind of across the board, we're about 22% down on last year's crops, which is quite significant. I think it's like one of the 4 years over the last century that have been this low. So.
And it's affected both quality and quantity?
I would say more so quantity. There's always ways of counteracting quality. It depends if people are desperate to make wine. They can obviously push out more watered-down grapes. There's been a lot of rain, if you hadn't noticed. Not only in France, we felt it here too. But lots of frost, supercell hailstorms have completely wiped out some crops. So in some cases, there's nothing to make. In other cases, it's just really watered-down grapes, and you want to pick earlier to make sure you're avoiding all those rains. But I would say more so it's quantity. But saying that, France is still the biggest producer of wine in the world. It might be taken over by Spain this year, but as a consumer, don't panic. We're not going to run out of wine. And we obviously have lots of lovely wine growing here now in England. So whether we do make a little jump for a bit to English wine, but there's definitely still lots out there.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Monday, the 18th of November. I'm Miriam Cates.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer has said that a strong UK-China relationship is important as he met Chinese President Xi Jinping in Brazil.
And the US President Joe Biden has given the green light for Ukraine to use long-range US missiles to strike targets within Russia. Is this necessary for Ukraine, or does it risk escalation? And will Britain follow suit?
And thousands of farmers are set to descend on Westminster this week, rallying against Labour's controversial plans to increase inheritance tax on farms. How will Starmer's government handle this demonstration?
Well, it's a very international show today. We've been dipping into the G20 summit, all hosted in Rio de Janeiro. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's just wandered up that red carpet, and we have seen Turkish President Erdogan just go in as well. But I wonder who's in this car. This will test our knowledge. Perhaps it's not the wisest
Macron.
thing. Oh, there he is.
Putting on his jacket there.
Was he not wearing his jacket? What was he doing in that car? But no, leaders of the world all descending on the G20. Interesting because, unlike the G7, where everyone is at least nominally aligned in terms of policy, here we've got leaders from everywhere, from China to a representative from Russia. I mean, lots of other countries in this much broader forum.
Indeed, and we were saying before the break how important it is for these leaders to build a relationship with each other, for trade, for military interests, all those other things. But as you were saying, some of them have got very little time left. I mean, we know that Biden's out.
Yes.
Schultz probably is going to be out. Macron's got a few years left, but it's definitely on his last term. We know that. So there's not much permanence in these relationships.
No, actually, I mean, looking at Macron there and thinking about how long he's been, he's sort of one of the elder statesmen at this gathering. And one of the safest, because his elections aren't until 2027 when he's term limited. But the other people, I mean, we know that Trudeau in Canada is 20 points behind in the polls. He's going to lose next year. We know that Olaf Scholz is 20 points behind in the polls in Germany. He's going to lose next year. I mean, we've seen every single election that has taken place this year in the world, the incumbent government. Oh,
he's doing a little run.
He's proving his youth and vitality.
Indeed.
But my goodness me, every single world leader that's gone to the polls this year has lost vote share in the election all over the world. I mean, we saw it with Rishi Sunak, we saw it with the Democrats in America. We're going to see it in, I think, many, many more countries.
And of course, there was the COVID factor that no government that was in power during COVID was re-elected, and that's kind of understandable because whether or not governments got things right or wrong, they were very, very difficult years, huge economic consequences. But it does seem to be the case that this anti-incumbency is continuing, and I do wonder if the rise of the internet and social media has anything to do with that, because it's now so easy and quick to criticise a government in power 24/7 that very quickly all governments now lose their honeymoon period. I mean, look at what's happened to Labour here.
Although I do think that perhaps double-digit inflation, sharp interest rate rises that we like to pretend only happened in the United Kingdom, but actually happened all over the world.
And serious migration problems, again, that Trump's talking about today.
Absolutely, and they'll be, of course, talking about all of these things at G20, and we'll be discussing them too. But you can get involved at gbnews.com/your say. We'll get to your comments a little bit later in the show. All to come after your very latest headlines with Tatiana.
Tom, thank you very much. The top stories. Whilst Sir Keir Starmer says a strong UK-China relationship is important for both of our countries, as he met the Chinese President Xi Jinping on the fringes of the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. Sir Keir also suggested a full UK-China meeting in London or Beijing as part of his desire for consistent, durable, respectful ties between the two countries. Sir Keir Starmer became the first Prime Minister to meet the Chinese presidents since 2018. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer says we need to double down on support for Ukraine as President Joe Biden has given the green light to Kyiv to use US-supplied long-range missiles to strike inside Russia. The Prime Minister says Ukraine is top of his agenda at the G20 summit of world leaders and told reporters there's got to be full support as long as it takes. President Vladimir Putin has warned the West they would be playing with fire if they allowed Ukrainian forces to launch Western-supplied cruise and ballistic missiles at Russia, saying it could even trigger a global conflict. It seems a move by North Korea to send thousands of its troops to fight with Russia has changed US calculations and forced Joe Biden into making this decision. Shadow Secretary of the State for Defence, James Cartledge, says the move is justified.
Russia invaded Ukraine, wholly unprovoked, illegal invasion, a dictatorship invading a democracy. So it's been the right thing to do to not be directly involved in Ukraine, but to support them in whatever way we can in terms of providing munitions. That's helped Ukraine to check their advance. But there's been a major development. We talk about escalation. Imagine how the Russians would feel if 10,000 NATO troops were now in Ukraine supporting them. The fact is 10,000 North Korean troops have been deployed into this battle. We understand from the US State Department they've been injected directly into the fight with Russia. That is a major strategic development, and I think in those circumstances this decision is justified.
Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson told GB News this morning that the government are committed to helping the Ukrainian people.
We stand steadfast behind the Ukrainian people, behind the Ukrainian government. That was the case under the last Conservative government, and there was cross-party support in the face of Russian aggression for the Ukrainian people. We continue to maintain that position, and as we enter almost the 1,000th day of the conflict, I think it really brings into sharp focus the sacrifices of the Ukrainian people. And the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary, from our point of view, will always continue to keep under review what is necessary by way of military aid for the Ukrainian people.
In other news, burglars raided the Windsor Castle estate while the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children reportedly slept nearby. The King and Queen were not in the residence. The Sun reported that the two men are said to have climbed a 6-foot fence at night and stole farm vehicles during that raid last month. They used a stolen truck to break through a gate said to be the nearest exit for the Prince, Princess and their children before targeting Shaw Farm, a working farm inside the estate. The pair remain at large. And Tottenham midfielder Rodrigo Bentancur has been given a 7-match ban and fined £100,000 for an alleged racist remark that he made about his South Korean teammate Song Heung-min during an interview. The Uruguayan was charged by the FA after the interview, which emerged in June, that showed him being asked by a television host to show the shirt of a Spurs player. Well, he replied, "Sonny's, it could be Sonny's cousin too, as they all look the same." Well, he apologised on Instagram, saying it was a very bad joke. Bentancur will miss Tottenham's next 7 domestic fixtures. And TV presenter Davina McCall has made an enormous leap forward in the last 24 hours, that coming from her partner as he posted her health update on Instagram. Michael Douglas has thanked well-wishers, adding that Davina has made an enormous leap forward and she's now out of ICU and is loving awareness. He said thank you. The post also featured an image saying massive relief to see some light breaking through. 57-year-old Davina had revealed in a video posted on Instagram earlier on Friday she had a benign brain tumour, a colloid cyst, which she described as very rare. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1:08 p.m. and the President of the United States, Joe Biden, has approved the use of US long-range missiles by Ukraine to strike targets inside Russia, a decision that has been warmly welcomed by both President Zelensky and the embattled Ukrainian army.
All eyes now turn to British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer for a moment to stop sunning himself on the beaches of Rio de Janeiro and to see whether or not he'll follow suit and allow British Storm Shadow missiles to be used in a similar fashion.
However, the Kremlin has responded with fury at President Biden's decision, accusing Washington of throwing oil on the fire of the conflict.
Well, we're now joined in the studio by GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White. Mark, Ukraine has been asking for this permission for a long, long time. Why now?
Well, you have to ask Joe Biden why now. I mean, it may be something to do with the impending Trump presidency. It may be something to do with the undoubted escalation that Russia is involved in bringing more than 10,000 North Korean troops to the front line, effectively, to the Kursk region in Russia, to take part in the efforts there to regain that territory from Ukraine. But whatever the reason, the go-ahead has been given, and I think it's likely it would be very surprising if the UK didn't follow suit with our long-range missiles, the Storm Shadow, because the UK has been pushing for months for the US to allow Ukraine to use these missiles into Russia.
I should mention we've just been looking at some pictures of those North Korean troops arriving in Russia. But now I believe these are our missiles.
These are Storm Shadow missiles, yeah, a range of about 150 miles. The US long-range missiles, appropriately named ATACMS, have a range of 190 miles. So they can penetrate pretty far inland and would be of significant use.
Mark, I'm just going to interrupt you because Giorgia Meloni has arrived at the G20 summit in Brazil. Meloni, of course, the Prime Minister of Italy, who has had several meetings with Sir Keir Starmer, particularly over the migration challenge that European countries really face. I wonder if Meloni and Sir Keir Starmer might well have any meetings at this conference, at least perhaps on the sidelines of this conference, because migration will be at the forefront of many of these leaders' minds.
Yes, I mean, Sir Keir Starmer has said that he wants Ukraine to be front and centre, but there's no doubt that that is one of the key issues that he will want explored as well. And you're right to say that they have had discussions in the past, and indeed the government, the Labour government, appear to be following through on some of the sort of proposals that Italy have, or policies that Italy have, in reaching out to countries further upstream in the migration story. Italy's been doing it with countries in North Africa like Tunisia and Libya, giving them more money and assistance to help them better protect their own coastlines from these smuggler gangs sending these migrants across the Mediterranean. And now we hear that a similar situation is being potentially looked at by the British government that might involve Vietnam, that might involve some of the other countries in the Balkans region, which is a key route through land, anyway, through into the European Union.
And of course, the Italians have had some success in deterring migrants from crossing into Italy, providing boats to certain African countries and other interventions. But really, all eyes are on their Albania scheme, whether or not that will work, whether they can deport people to a third country, as, of course, the UK tried. But is the ECHR going to turn out to be the problem, the barrier for all European countries trying to solve this issue?
Well, it's already been in the process of passing rulings suggesting that the policy of Giorgia Meloni may not be lawful in terms of that deal with the Albanians, but it just depends on Giorgia Meloni, who's seen as, you know, tough on this whole issue of illegal migration, what she's prepared to do. Is she prepared, as other European countries have done in the past, to simply ignore a ruling handed down by the European Court? That deterrent policy of sending them to Albania works alongside the other one, which is, of course, trying to get these countries, source countries and countries further uproot, to cooperate further. And in terms of a deterrent approach, the UK is not yet, if it ever gets to the position of looking at a third country to send migrants to for processing, but it is absolutely actively in agreements as we speak with a number of countries to to have better cooperation, law enforcement cooperation, training the law enforcement elements of various countries in how better to manage the illegal migration through their borders.
We were just discussing this in the last hour, but of course someone who's not there at that summit is Donald Trump, and he might well be now exploring a Rwanda deal for the United States. Perhaps even using the British infrastructure that was created there. But we should return to Ukraine, of course, because this is a real present danger, and lots of people are frightened, are afraid of what escalation could mean. Longer-range missiles being used into Russia, allowed by the West. Does this put the West at risk?
Well, potentially any development that gives more aid, and particularly military aid, to Ukraine could be enough to rattle the Russians. But remember, throughout the almost 3 years now of this war, we have had multiple steps along the way, the bellicose threats from the Russian leader and other Russian officials and in the media in Russia about this could well be a step towards World War III, that they reserve the right to use nuclear weapons. It's never happened yet, but of course we've had incremental steps where we've had long debate and discussion before eventually allowing Ukraine to use the weapon systems that we were pretty uneasy about giving them initially, and they've used them. And they've used them often to good effect against the Russians. There hasn't been any attempt by Russia to launch direct attacks on any Western countries that are supplying those arms, or indeed there hasn't been a move, as yet anyway, towards using nuclear weapons. And if it was nuclear weapons, it wouldn't be the huge atomic bombs that we are used to seeing, but potentially battlefield nuclear weapons.
But of course, that is the source of the concern with Russia. They are a nuclear power.
Yeah.
They do have to be treated slightly differently as a result. So perhaps that is why people are so nervous about this potential escalation.
But that's why we have this policy that we've had for generations now of mutually assured destruction. Anyone embarking on that course.
Goodness me, it reminds me of just the revelations last week that Liz Truss spent several days in Downing Street looking at nuclear radiation fallout maps in case there was a nuclear weapon used in Ukraine, because of the winds that could go across to the United Kingdom. Shudder to think of it. But Mark White, thank you very much indeed. Now, Sir Keir Starmer is to push for what he calls a pragmatic relationship with China when he meets the country's leader, Xi Jinping. He actually met Xi Jinping a little bit earlier today at that G20 summit in Rio.
Yes, well, the Prime Minister also says he wants to shore up international support for Ukraine, which follows the news that Joe Biden will allow Ukraine to strike inside Russia with US missiles, which is a policy shift that some claim may make World War III more likely.
Well, let's get the thoughts now of political commentator Peter Spencer, because, Peter, are relations between between China and the United Kingdom now thawing?
There's an element of that, most certainly, and there's also an element of my enemy's enemy is my friend. I mean, the backdrop to this is perfectly straightforward. President-elect Donald Trump is threatening huge tariffs on goods coming into the United States, up to 60%, with China very much in his sights. Now, if he were to impose those, logically, the Chinese would seek other markets and potentially swamp the UK with Chinese goods. Now, Britain doesn't particularly want this to happen. The British government doesn't particularly want this to happen, and therefore now seems like a pretty good moment to have a nice little chat with the Chinese president and smooth things out just a little bit. But I have to say, this fits into the overall picture of the saying goes that when America sneezes, the world catches a cold. Most certainly the ripples from the amazing victory of Donald Trump in the presidential election are spreading outwards, and they're hitting pretty much every part of the globe. And of course, all this fits into the same narrative with Joe Biden suddenly giving the go-ahead for long-range missiles, American missiles, to be used in Ukraine because he wants to shore up Ukraine's position before Donald Trump comes in and potentially trashes it.
Peter, this is quite a difficult relationship for Starmer to manage, isn't it? Because on the one hand, Chinese trade is very important to Britain. I think it was worth £90 billion last year. But on the other hand, Keir Starmer is a human rights lawyer. He and many other members of the Labour Party have been very outspoken about China's human rights record. And of course, he's coming off the back of a Conservative government that was increasingly hawkish about concerns about Chinese intelligence and potential breaches there. How is he going to manage this that's going to keep the Labour Party on side, but also take a practical approach to the trade which Britain undoubtedly needs?
How is he going to manage it? The answer is with some considerable difficulty. Of course, he's going to have to swallow a great many reservations about China's, to say the least, pretty sketchy record on human rights. And most certainly, as you rightly say, he will have to square that with a fair number of his own people in the Labour Party. But he is nonetheless faced with that bitter realpolitik which heaves into view here big time, which is that if the Chinese swamp us with their goods, we have a problem. And so he's got to go to some considerable lengths to try to prevent that.
And now we're learning, of course, that Keir Starmer has proposed a full bilateral meeting with Xi Jinping in either London or Beijing in the fallout from this summit. I mean, this really is a deepening of relationships between China and the United Kingdom. No Prime Minister has even met on the sidelines of a conference with Xi Jinping since the days of Theresa May. And now we could well be welcoming Xi Jinping back to London for the first time since the golden era under David Cameron and George Osborne.
Yes, indeed. We moved a very, very long way indeed from that golden era in subsequent years. I don't think we're going to go back to that, but I think that I come back to this point about realpolitik. I mean, and there is going to be that clash of cultures. I mean, it seems to me, I go back a long way. It seems to me only yesterday that when the Chinese president was with Tony Blair and they were going down, I think it was the Mall, if I remember correctly, and there were demonstrations, and the Chinese president said, well, look, why don't you just stop it? And Tony had to say, look, well, we sort of do things a bit differently here in England, you know how it is. I mean, there will be that huge clash of cultures and a huge clash of political perspectives. But he has to just face up to the reality, which is there is a very real threat to the British market and to British exporters and importers and so on. He's got to do something about it.
Peter, thank you so much. We'll have to leave it there. Peter, Spencer, thank you very much. Tom, of course, this is the difficulty for Britain, isn't it? Because China is not our friend from a military or a geopolitical point of view. But on the other hand, we've become incredibly dependent on Chinese trade and Chinese imports. Yeah, they're a huge, huge economy. And what was the word that the Sunak administration came up with? A sustained challenge, an epoch challenge. Epoch-defining challenge, but not a crisis. A threat. Yes, they wouldn't say a threat or a foe, just a challenge. But you could argue it has been a mistake to become so reliant on Chinese goods, and perhaps Trump has the right idea in restoring American industry. Could we possibly do the same here? A little bit more different here, of course. Well, lots more coming up on today's show. After the break, we'll be looking at children's social care.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
The number of pubs may reach critically low levels.
Absolutely. So what we're seeing is a decline in the number of pubs in Britain, and it's fallen. This is an absolutely astonishing figure. So it's basically fallen 10% in a decade. So do our maths. It doesn't take very long for that to happen. So if that carries on, we'd have, get this, only 1,000 pubs by 2074. So the big question is what will become extinct first: the bank branch on your high street, or the pub on your street corner? And this is a kind of perfect storm for landlords and landladies of, the cost of labour. We saw, remember when the energy prices were at the high, we just realised just how much energy it keeps to keep the lights on in the local boozer. Yeah. As well as, as the cost of the golden nectar itself. So, as they call it in Australia.
Well, talking about that, I was mentioning the other day to, was it my father-in-law? I said, when I first started going to the pub, I was 15, they
Okay.
They,
Just that on
half a lemonade, half a shandy.
I was nearly 16, I got half a shandy. No, we used to have Monday Club where a pint of Foster's was £1.50, and my father-in-law was saying, I went to London the other day, a pint was £8.
Yeah.
Can you believe it?
Yeah.
And when you've got those kind of prices, why wouldn't you just go down the supermarket and get 16 tinnies for £5?
So you're going all Aussie now. Put the tinnies in the esky before you have the bar.
Good day, mate. Why not?
I agree, actually. I think it's concerning. A lot of people look at the high streets and they're very concerned that it's looking quite glum, to be honest. You know, lots of things are closing. But the reality is it's because people are not buying from the high street. They're not going to the pub, you know. People are just deciding, you know, what they're going to do in their spare time. Are they really going to go to the pub, or are they going to potentially go to, you know, David Lloyd or a Nuffield, you know, join a gym membership? They're just looking at their expenses and just deciding, you know what, we're going to actually cut costs, you know.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your-say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1:25 p.m. and companies making excessive profits from children's social services will soon be curbed. It's part of a new plan from the Department of Education to crack down on exploitative providers. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson says far too many children in social care are being let down.
Going to crack down on the excessive profiteering that we see from private companies, and also make sure there is much higher quality provision, because we are talking about some of the most vulnerable children in our country, sometimes children who will have seen and witnessed awful things and have experienced trauma, and they deserve a lot better from us, and this government is determined to deliver better life chances for children.
Well, joining us now is the Labour Member of Parliament, Jake Richards. Jake, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Firstly, what are these plans going to actually physically change on the ground?
Well, we need to see all the detail, of course, Tom. The Secretary of State, I believe, is coming to Parliament in the next few hours. I'm going to be in there to look at that detail. But first things first, we should praise this government for taking this issue incredibly seriously. It is a disgrace, frankly, the state of our children's social care system in this country. We have private companies making record profits off the back of vulnerable children and desperate local authorities. And actually, they're not even offering a good service for the record profits that they're making. So I'm really pleased that this morning the Secretary of State has made this a priority for her and this government. Of course, the devil's always in the detail, but at least let's praise them for getting a grip of this issue at long last.
Yes, absolutely. And I remember, Jake, when I was on the Education Committee in Parliament, we did look at this issue, and it is shocking how much is spent on some of these placements. I think 1,500 placements are costing over £500,000 a year each, which is clearly far, far too much. But it seems to me that the problem is that because property has become so expensive, not just in this country, but in most Western countries, councils can no longer afford to buy properties outright to use as children's homes, and therefore they're outsourcing this to private companies. Isn't that the source of the problem, rather than just excessive profiteering?
Well, Miriam, I think you're right, actually, and there is going to be a longer-term generational challenge, frankly, to change the estate, i.e. to change how we fund and how we organise children's homes for those who can't be looked after by their family. So I accept that there will need to be real long-term changes, but I'm also pleased that there is an emphasis on the short-term, because we cannot just let a generation of children and also local authorities struggle in the meantime. But I accept the challenge, you're right. You know, this isn't something that can be solved overnight. impact. We've seen what's happened in Wales, where they've tried to make some quite radical changes, and that's had some unintended consequences as well as some benefits too. So yeah, I accept the challenge, Miriam. This is going to be something that we will need to look at over a decade at least. But look, I'm really pleased that the Secretary of State is taking this seriously. I think there are some short-term measures that we can take, but also be committed to long-term reform too.
I suppose the problem would be, Jake, and my challenge back to you would be that what's being proposed by the government, so people will absolutely agree this is a problem that needs to be addressed, but what's being proposed is just greater transparency. We get to see more of the profits that are being made. How is that going to reduce this problem?
Well, let's wait and see, Miriam, first of all, exactly what the proposal is. There's legislation, I think, coming either later, before Christmas or early in the next year, which will hopefully add some bites to this. But yes, I think the first step first is actually getting some transparency in the system. Look, let's be very clear for your viewers. It's an utter disgrace that the taxpayer is paying sometimes, as you said, tens of £1,000s per week for unsuitable accommodation for the most vulnerable children in our society. If we step back and think about that for a minute, we're failing young people, the young people who probably need our help the most, we're failing the taxpayer, and sometimes some pretty dodgy companies are making record profits off the back of it. So look, let's first of all find out the extent of this catastrophe in our social care system. These measures will do that, but of course we will need to then have bite to actually make the reforms that are necessary. But yes, a fair challenge again, Miriam.
Jake, just hold that thought for 1 second. We're going to show some pictures live from the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro, where President Xi Jinping of China has just arrived, walking the red carpet that Keir Starmer walked just around 20 minutes ago. Now, of course, the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, met on the sidelines with Xi Jinping a little bit earlier, where he offered a full bilateral meeting with the Chinese president, either in London or in Beijing. This is an interesting development, of course, in UK-China relations.
And as we were saying earlier, the pendulum is swinging back again after the pro-Chinese position taken by Osborne and Cameron back 10, 15 years ago, and then the last Conservative government became a lot more hawkish on China. There seems to be a bit of a rapprochement again. But, of course, lots of people will be concerned about security issues that China has, or lots of allegations of intellectual property theft and things like that, of course, people in universities are concerned about. Is this a good idea?
Yes, and while we still have you, Jake Richards, sorry for putting you on the spot as a newly elected Labour MP, but should we be concerned about this thawing of relations between the UK and China? Is Keir Starmer treating China too friendlily?
Well, I must admit, I'm really focused on how we're looking after the most vulnerable children in the country. But look, I actually think it's good that the Prime Minister is on the global stage batting for Britain. You know, there's no denying that there are concerns about the Chinese regime and their influence across the world. But I think we have to have a dialogue with them. And I'm pleased that Keir Starmer's at this G20 summit and is going to be flying the flag for Britain. But again, I appreciate what Miriam has said. I find myself agreeing with Miriam more and more now she's out of Parliament than when she was in it. But yes, there are some concerns. There are certainly some concerns about China and their activities and security concerns and other concerns as well. But we have to have a dialogue with China, and I'm pleased that the Prime Minister is going to be doing that.
OK. Well, Labour MP Jake Richards, thanks so much for joining us here on Good Afternoon Britain.
Well, I haven't changed anything I've said before, during or after Parliament.
It's because you're no longer wearing your rosettes.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
It breaks down political barriers. Well, I'm all for that. You're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Up next, young people could lose their benefits if they refuse offers of training or apprenticeships under the government's new Youth Guarantee Plan. Lots more coming up.
Good afternoon. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer says a strong UK-China relationship is important for both of our countries as he met Chinese President Xi Jinping on the fringes of the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. Sir Keir also suggested a full UK-China meeting in London or Beijing as part of his desire for consistent, durable, respectful ties between the two countries. Well, the Chinese president has since said that his nation and the UK share the dual responsibility of addressing global challenges. Sir Keir Starmer became the first Prime Minister to meet the Chinese president since 2018. World leaders have been arriving at that G20 summit in Brazil. The Prime Minister says Ukraine is top of his agenda and told reporters there's got to be full support as long as it takes. Sir Keir Starmer says we need to double down on support for Ukraine as President Joe Biden gave the green light to Kyiv to use US-supplied long-range missiles to strike inside Russia. President Vladimir Putin warned the West they would be playing with fire if they allowed Ukrainian forces to launch Western-supplied cruise and ballistic missiles at Russia. It seems a move by North Korea to send thousands of its troops to fight with Russia has changed the US calculations and forced the US president into making this decision. Let's take you live to Rio de Janeiro and that G20 summit.
We can see Joe Biden arriving at the G20 summit as we speak. The American president in office, of course, until the 21st of January, arriving moments after Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, arrived and walked down the same red carpet.
I assume this is all carefully coordinated. They're giving exact times to enter. Interesting, he's going a different way, not up that slope that we've seen Macron run up and Keir Starmer walk up.
We were talking about what a long walk it was for these world leaders, and if some of the more elderly world leaders on the global stage would be forced to walk up a long, sloping entrance, it seems that the president of the richest country on earth gets a free pass and doesn't have to do the walk of shame, or perhaps the walk of glory, I'm not sure.
Well, of course, he is in his 80s, and I think it would be a little bit much to expect him to walk up there. Of course, one of the reasons he is no longer in office, or soon to be no longer in office, is indeed because of his age. And you've got presidents of half of his age, Macron, also in attendance.
And Macron, as we saw, ran up that slope. But this rather has upended the G20's publicity plans, because we see this lovely swooping camera shot with no one walking up that red carpet.
He's taken a shortcut.
He's taken a shortcut. I don't know. Did he take a stair lift? I think that's too much to say. But he'll be meeting with President Lula of Brazil. No, it is interesting. He's so far the only leader to have taken a shortcut.
Is he the eldest world leader at the G20? I think
it's
quite possibly.
I think it's safe to say
who would be the youngest, I wonder? I mean, Macron's in his mid-40s, is he?
Trudeau's still quite young, even younger when elected.
The Mexican leader looks young, but I don't know. Wouldn't want to speculate.
Well, Mexico has just elected their new president, so perhaps. But
of course, world leaders arriving all day for this important summit. We've already been covering this meeting between our Prime Minister Keir Starmer and the Chinese President Xi Jinping, talking about trade, potentially Trump's trade war with tariffs that's going to impact British economy as well.
And very, very interesting how Keir Starmer has offered a visit to Xi Jinping to London. They had a meeting on the sidelines of the conference. It's called an informal meeting when it's on the sidelines of the conference, but it's actually, it's still all highly organised and highly structured, and there's a sort of a photo op, and we've seen the pictures of the two men meeting. But a full bilateral meeting is sort of the next step up. And Keir Starmer's gambit to Xi Jinping was, well, we can have a bilateral, we can have it either in Beijing or in London. So could it be that we actually see the Chinese president return to London? That would be quite a signal, quite a step, and actually quite a big statement that the UK is following more the European and less the American model of global relations.
And it's a really difficult conundrum, isn't it? Because on the one hand, China is an important trading partner, whether or not you think we're right to become so dependent on Chinese imports. The fact is we are. But on the other hand, there is a significant geopolitical threat from China, a close ally of Russia, and clearly not a friend of NATO and our own allies. So it's a difficult relationship to play from Keir Starmer's point of view, but a marked departure from the last government under Rishi Sunak, which was much more hawkish on China.
Now, I must say, people are standing around here at the G20 entrance for the Rio summit with cameras aloft. Could it be that Mr Biden isn't there yet and has been taking a very long way to get to the entrance. Could that is an extraordinary length of time that it's taken Joe Biden to walk from the entrance up to there. I mean...
It wasn't a shortcut after all, Tom.
I do feel sorry for the man who, of course, has been in elected politics since the 1970s. Really quite extraordinary, but he has taken perhaps a more gentle route to get there to meet the Brazilian President Lula.
Of course, he is only, I think, 3 years older than Donald Trump. It's quite extraordinary that the two successive leaders, well, 3 if you include Trump's first term, are so elderly.
Yeah, it's extraordinary given that, well, America is quite a new country. They like to promote themselves as a new country, but governed by such old people.
How old was Churchill in his second term in the 50s? He was in his 80s, so not completely unprecedented.
But we've also had Pitt the Younger, who was in his 20s. He was 25, I think 24
I think
or
younger.
25.
Yeah.
Well, I think he was Chancellor at 23 and Prime Minister at 24. But he died at age 44 after almost 20 years as Prime Minister. But we're getting off track a little bit there.
Enjoying ourselves a little bit too much.
We really are. There we are. There's Joe Biden meeting with the Brazilian President Lula at the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. We've been looking at world leaders arrive on that red carpet all afternoon.
And probably the last significant international conference for Biden before he hands over.
At least it's somewhere so sunny and so beautiful,
doesn't it? I'm sure they'll be working really hard the whole time they're there.
Yeah, well, I hope they get some time on the beach as well.
I'm sure they will.
Really very, very nice. In other news, young people could lose their benefits if they refuse offers of training or apprenticeships under the government's new Youth Guarantee plan. Well, this initiative, set out and set to be unveiled later this month, will target unemployed 18 to 21-year-olds to connect them with jobs, training or education opportunities.
Well, with long-term sickness among young people at record highs, Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall aims to tackle rising economic inactivity, which cost £65 billion last year.
Serious money. Well, we're joined now by a policy director from the Centre for Social Justice, Edward Davies. Edward, just how big is this problem?
Yeah, it's probably the biggest problem that the government faces at the moment. You've got an awful lot of people. You've got nearly 3 million people who are now long-term sick, too sick to work. And to its credit, the government has rightly identified young people with mental health conditions largely dropping out of the workforce as probably its biggest challenge. And so, I mean, with all these things, the devil will be in the detail, but at least they're identifying the right problem as a starting point. And the idea of putting some conditionality into the benefit system, into some of those groups, is probably a good thing. I think conditionality has had a bad reputation over the years, but actually it just means we want to help you. Come and see us at the job centre. We can try and get you a job. So devil will be in the detail, but a reasonable start, I think.
Ed, you mentioned mental health conditions. How are these diagnosed or declared? Do young people or people of any age declare that they're too sick to work for mental health reasons, or do they have to be signed off by a doctor? And how robust are these mechanisms for checking people's health?
Yeah, I mean, that is a really, really important point, that we are seeing this rise, and what the actual rise is complicated. So there is some fear that some of this, as we have sort of destigmatized mental health, which is a good thing, we have sort of drawn out more than perhaps is out there for people over-declaring this problem. There is a fear that we over-medicalize what is essentially a social problem as well. But there is also a real growth as well, which is a real concern. And actually, you know, you just had a really interesting article there on social care. We're seeing a fairly steady 30-year rise of children being taken into care. We're seeing a similar sort of rise in young men who are not in education, employment or training. And I think probably the thing to recognise is we potentially overdiagnose specific mental health conditions, but there is need there. There is something going on with our young people that is not good. And actually, if you start your working life by going straight onto benefits, that is a lifelong scarring problem, because after 6 months, a year, 2 years, it becomes harder and harder to get a job. And so making sure we really target that group, and whether it is, you know, a diagnosable mental health problem or not, there is something going on there, and we need to make sure we're doing something about it.
Edward, we're constantly told how low the unemployment rate is in the UK, and it is low if we measure people who are out of work, not looking for work, or are classified as job seekers, all the rest of it. But are we actually massively miscounting the number of unemployed people in this country? Because, of course, if you sign off sick from work, you're not counted in those statistics. And it could be that there's a significant proportion of people who are off work because of these mental health issues who perhaps should be better categorised in how we treat these numbers.
Yeah, I mean, that is a really good point. I think just in terms for viewers as well, that there is this sort of technical differentiation between being unemployed and economically inactive. So unemployed means you're not in work, but you are looking for work. Economically inactive means you're not in work and you're not looking for work. And it's definitely true that our unemployment, those people looking for work, is pretty good, actually. But our economic inactivity, and particularly that long-term sick category, is really not good. And there are questions about how the welfare system has incentivised that potentially over the years, that actually you get a lot more money, frankly, by going into that inactive group. And that can mean that if you are sort of, you have a slight mental health problem or a bad back or something, you might lean into that, particularly if there's not good work in your area. You might be looking at a sort of poorly paid, slightly insecure job or secure benefits. Doesn't make it right, but it is rational that people might do that. Yeah. So you've got to sort of weigh up the different bits of the benefit system and how they incentivise people as well. It does appear that there does need to be some change in that.
Yeah, really interesting stuff there. Edward Davies of the Centre for Social Justice, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We're going to hop to Brazil right now because Javier Milei, the renegade president of Argentina, won an astonishing election victory almost from nowhere at the end of last year. He's now arrived at the G20 summit. Here he is walking up that red carpet.
And, of course, a very controversial leader who I believe promised to take a chainsaw to government regulations. A very almost Thatcherite leader wanting to massively reduce the size of the state. Yes. Signs are that he's being quite successful, certainly very bold.
And he famously coined the political phrase afuera, afuera. To coin how he's going to dismantle all of these different government departments, slash taxes, slash inflation, slash spending. But also, he's been spending the last couple of weeks up in the United States. He was at Mar-a-Lago at a private event with Donald Trump. Interesting how he sort of has the ear of the incoming president of the United States, because he is perhaps one of the most radical libertarian leaders of any of this group. It will be very interesting to see how Javier Milei interacts with a lot of the people who represent basically everything he stands against.
Indeed, it is a huge spectrum of different political philosophies represented here at this summit. It'd be interesting to know what they can actually agree on. I suppose starting with trade is potentially the way forward, but they certainly won't agree on the climate, for example.
No, and here he is with Lula, who is recently elected, or a couple of years ago elected president of Brazil, whom he hates. And he's spoken out against for a long, long time, of course, Argentina and Brazil, neighbouring countries. But even Milei withdrew Argentina from the BRICS group, which includes Brazil under Lula, but also Russia and China and these other countries. Argentina had joined. He withdrew from those summits because he said that this was a group of sort of tyranny. But very interesting that he had to shake hands there with Lula.
Absolutely. Always important to be polite, absolutely. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain. Plenty more coming up on today's show.
Yes, masked raiders snuck into the Windsor Castle estate as the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children slept in their nearby home. We'll have much more on that after this.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Go on, Eamon.
Go on, Eamon. What does Eamon mean? I mean, I must admit, I never liked my name, ever. And then I realised that it's made me more individual because there are no other Eamons about. So therefore I can go by, whereas no one would know Isabel. She's Isabel Webster. She'd have two names. Was
It's all real. Means I'm not light or
But I was named after the TV presenter. My mother was in hospital, couldn't think of a name, and the TV presenter, Eamon Andrews, popped up on the television, and she said, "Oh, he's got hair like my Eamon." And she called me Eamon after him.
Oh, lovely. Oh,
that may have determined what I ended up doing.
My mum said if I was a boy, I would have been called Marius.
Marius?
Which I think is quite a weird choice.
It is a bit of a
Marius
weird
Webster.
one.
I'm forever grateful.
I'll say this, whatever you call a child, however weird or strange, whatever, the child becomes that name. So
Over half of us judge people instantly on their name. So we make assumptions on people based on their name.
But
I'm not sure I do, but I mean, you mentioning you changing your name from an African name to a more anglicised name.
No doubt about that. So there's no doubt about that. Like, you know, if I'm on the blower, I sound like a London boy.
Yeah.
But I turn up as Keezy. Boy, mate, you don't belong around here.
Yeah.
That was what it was like 50 years ago. You know, now, I mean, and like even today. So sometimes today, like, I get some speaking engagements, and I will wear my traditional wear because, you know, I've accepted Keezy and my African heritage. And then the abuse you get on social media, you're not British, call yourself English, mate.
No.
You know, and you get all sorts of lyrics. So a name, when a name says your ancestry is from another part of the country, part of the world, it can be detrimental.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK.
We're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player app. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain. It's 10 to 2. Masked men attempted to raid Windsor Castle's grounds while Prince William, Princess Catherine and their children were asleep nearby. That's according to the Sun newspaper.
Well, two men are understood to have scaled a 6-foot-high fence that guarded a rural area. This was all at night in order to steal farm vehicles. Thames Valley Police confirmed a burglary at a property on the Crown Estate back in October.
Well, GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker joins us now. Cameron, this is obviously a worrying breach of security. This was leaked by The Sun, though. This isn't an official breaching, is that correct?
Yeah, this was leaked by to The Sun this morning. Thames Valley Police have subsequently confirmed there was a break-in at Shore Farm, which is a working farm within the Windsor Castle estate, not far from Adelaide Cottage, where the Prince and Princess of Wales and their 3 young children were sleeping. The incident happened on the 13th of October at about 11:45 p.m. is when the police were first told of the incident, and the only reason they knew about it, because as you said in your introduction, the 2 masked men scaled the perimeter fence here at Windsor. They got into one of the barns at Shore Farm and then made off with a quad bike and a pickup truck, and it's when they smashed through the Shore Farm gate, which is about half a mile from Adelaide Cottage, just a couple of minutes drive from that building where the Prince and Princess of Wales live, that obviously set off some kind of alarm security system, but the gate was so had to be replaced, but there was no official statement from the police at the time. As you say, it was only after the Sun newspaper broke the story that Thames Valley Police confirmed that it happened, but it has raised a wider concern about the security and the safety of members of the royal family while they are on the Windsor Castle estates, because the Sun on Sunday has reported that the constant presence, the 24/7 presence of armed police officers at King Henry VIII Gate, which is the gate you see behind me, and indeed indeed Shore Farm Gate, which is where the thieves smashed through on their escape from the Windsor Castle perimeter. They have actually, they're not there 24/7 anymore. They're only there for specific occasions, notably changing of the guards. It's understood that there are armed officers clearly around within the grounds of Windsor Castle at any given time. But of course, Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace do not comment on specific security concerns. I have also contacted Thames Valley Police and the Metropolitan Police, who have specific responsibilities to protect members of the royal family. They don't want to go into security issues either. So there is a bit of a mystery, but it is the latest in a long line of incidents, because in February a man scaled the perimeter fence again and was arrested for trespassing very close to the King's apartments here at Windsor Castle. And then back in December 2021, an armed man who had a crossbow was arrested in the grounds of Windsor Castle, telling the police that he was here to kill the Queen. Now, he was subsequently sentenced for treason and is in a mental health hospital. So I'm sure there are perhaps questions being asked, but of course the armed guards on the gate are just one level of security perhaps that protects members of the royal family. And in this particular incident, those two thieves were just targeting farm equipment rather than members of the royal family.
Well, Cameron Walker, thank you very much for joining us there live from Windsor Castle.
Well, clearly concerning, but seems like motivated by agricultural theft rather than anything to do with the royal family.
Do you think they knew the royal family was particularly nearby? Perhaps not. Perhaps they wouldn't have done so if they...
Very opportunist, if not. Well, you're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and lots more coming up for you on today's show. Don't go anywhere.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Here's your latest GB News weather update, brought to you by the Met Office. There's some pretty cold weather across parts of the UK at the moment, and with that, there's the risk of some disruptive snow as we go through the next 24 hours, because a frontal system is going to push in and bump into the cold air currently across many northern parts, leading to the rain turning to snow. Already as we go through the end of the afternoon, some snow over higher ground of Northern Ireland, but it's across parts of northern England where we're likely to see the greatest disruption from the snow, potentially 20 centimetres of lying snow above some higher ground, even a little bit to lower levels potentially. Further north, some wintry showers for northern Scotland, some clearer skies across other parts of Scotland, leading to a harsh frost here, temperatures perhaps falling as low as -8, but it's a milder, albeit cloudier and perhaps damp story further south. As we go through tomorrow morning then, those wintry showers could bring a bit of sleet, bit of snow, also some icy patches, so some difficult conditions first thing. A drier story though across more central and southern parts of Scotland, and by the morning most of the wet and wintry weather will have cleared through Northern Ireland, and it will be clearing away from parts of northern England too. Further south, it's a milder start to the day. There will be some outbreaks of rain, but again most of that will be clearing away towards the east as we go through the morning. A lot of dry weather then following in behind, and things should turn a bit sunnier as well for many places, especially towards the north. But towards the southwest here, there will be some outbreaks of rain around, and some of them could be a little bit on the heavy side. We will see our temperatures actually dropping for some places as we go through the day. A real chilly feel to things, and with some brisk winds coming in from the north, it is going to feel particularly cold indeed. We stick with that northerly wind as we go through the end of the day, so still some wintry showers, particularly across northern parts of Scotland, but also parts of Northern Ireland too, and anywhere exposed to that northerly wind. And that's the theme as we go through the rest of the week, really. A cold feel with some wintry showers at times. Bye-bye.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text BONUS to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got, in my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Monday, the 18th of November. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Miriam Cates.
Sir Keir Starmer has said that a strong UK-China relationship is important. That as he met the Chinese President Xi Jinping in Brazil. He's even invited President Xi to London.
Yes, well, the government have just placed fresh sanctions on Iran for aiding Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. This comes as President Joe Biden has given the green light for Ukraine to use long-range US missiles to strike targets inside Russia. Is this necessary for Ukraine, or does it risk escalation? Will the UK follow suit?
Thousands of farmers are set to descend on Westminster this week, rallying against the government's controversial plans for a family farm tax. How will Starmer's government handle this demonstration? And of course, throughout the show today, we're going to be dipping in to the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro, where all of the great and the good, the most powerful men and women in the world are meeting. And here live we can see President Joe Biden. He's sitting next to Narendra Modi, the recently re-elected Prime Minister of India. You've got plenty of other world leaders. We're jumping between these shots very quickly, but you saw Egypt there as well.
We've been keeping track of the leaders as they've got out of their big cars and walked up this long red carpet with quite a steep incline to get to the top, and notably Joe Biden took another route.
And here's Cyril Ramaphosa, the Prime Minister of South Africa, next to Xi Jinping of China. As we were saying, Xi Jinping has already met with Keir Starmer. President Lula of Brazil there, almost presiding over the whole affair.
Indeed. Fantastic location for a conference. I'm sure they'll be working extremely hard, but hopefully get time to enjoy a little bit of the sunshine. There is President Macron sitting next to President Biden. Of course, Macron's got a few years left in office. Biden just a couple of months.
Absolutely, and this is really going to be President Biden's big last international hurrah. But what an international hurrah hurrah it is. Unlike the G7, where it's 7 countries that basically have quite an aligned foreign policy, quite an aligned view on economics and all the rest of it, this is a very diverse array of different countries. You've got representatives from Russia, China, you've also got, of course, the EU and the US, but a whole bunch of other leaders that you don't often see at these international events as well.
And of course, the only thing they have in common is the size of their economies, and that's it. So, of course, that's a good place to start for discussions on trade. But on other matters, foreign policy, like you say, but also things like climate policy, there will be very little agreement between the likes of Millet, perhaps, and even our own Keir Starmer.
Absolutely, but all of those, there's Anthony Albanese of Australia, but of course all of these world leaders will be to some extent trying to project their own country. How much of what they do here is for those other people in the room, and how much is actually for their domestic audience? Keir Starmer studiously ignoring the Saudi Arabian representative there.
There's so much politics at play here, isn't there? And very little of real significance can be discussed in this kind of context. Of course, it's completely transparent, open to the world, open to the media. And the interesting things will, I assume, happen behind the scenes. There's Argentinian President Millet talking to Emmanuel Macron of France.
No,
wonder what they're talking about.
They're holding each other tight.
Are they about to have an arm wrestle, or is this all friendly?
Xi Jinping looking a little bit lonely in his sort of Winnie the Pooh-like way.
And of course, an enormous number of different languages spoken here. Yeah. They've all got their earpiece in, and there'll be live interpreters interpreting from one language into another very quickly. It's a very complex thing to organise, but of course they'll all be used to that.
Absolutely fascinating to see all of these powerful people all in one place. The security must
phenomenal.
Be absolutely
Trudeau,
unimaginable.
And I think the Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum.
Yeah. Really, really interesting to see.
Trudeau may not have long left either in office.
Probably he's going to lose this election next year. He's a man deep below the waterline in terms of those polls in Canada. But yeah, very, very interesting to see all of these people all in one room. We'll be, of course, covering this conference as it continues, and frankly, as anything interesting happens there too.
Brilliant. Well, we'll be back soon. We've got your news headlines first, coming up with Tatiana.
Good afternoon. The top stories. Whilst Keir Starmer says a strong UK-China relationship is important for both of our countries as he met Chinese President Xi Jinping on the fringes of the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. Keir Starmer also suggested a full UK-China meeting in London or Beijing as part of his desire for, quote, consistent, durable, respectful ties between the two countries. Keir Starmer became the first Prime Minister to meet the Chinese President since 2018. Or some breaking news that the UK has sanctioned Iran for aiding Russia's illegal war in Ukraine as the Foreign Secretary chairs the UN Security Council. Now that is as world leaders have been arriving at that G20 summit in Brazil. The Prime Minister says Ukraine is top of his agenda and told reporters there's got to be full support as long as it takes. Keir Starmer says we need to double down on support for Ukraine as President Joe Biden's given the green light to Kyiv to use US-supplied long-range missiles to strike inside Russia. Vladimir Putin has warned the West they would be playing with fire if they allowed Ukrainian forces to launch Western-supplied missiles at Russia. It seems a move by North Korea to send thousands of its troops to fight with Russia has changed US calculations and forced the US president into making that decision. Shadow Secretary of State for Defence James Cartledge says the move is justified.
Russia invaded Ukraine, wholly unprovoked, illegal invasion, a dictatorship invading a democracy. So it's been the right thing to do to not be directly involved in Ukraine, but to support them in whatever way we can in terms of providing munitions. That's helped Ukraine to check their advance. But there's been a major development. We talk about escalation. Imagine how the Russians would feel if 10,000 NATO troops were now in Ukraine supporting them. The fact is 10,000 North Korean troops have been deployed into this battle. We understand from the US State Department they've been injected directly into the fight with Russia. That is a major strategic development, and I think in those circumstances this decision is justified.
Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson told GB News this morning that the government are committed to helping the Ukrainian people.
We stand steadfast behind the Ukrainian people, behind the Ukrainian government. That was the case under the last Conservative government, and there was cross-party support in the face of Russian aggression for the Ukrainian people. We continue to maintain that position, and as we enter almost the 1,000th day of the conflict, I think it really brings into sharp focus the sacrifices of the Ukrainian people. And the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary, from our point of view, will always continue to keep under review what is necessary by way of military aid for the Ukrainian people.
In other news, Sir Keir Starmer says he's absolutely confident that the vast majority of farms and farmers will not be affected by changes to inheritance tax announced in the budget. The row over the taxes for farms worth more than £1 million continues, as the Prime Minister said last night that the money the government's put into the sector is not to be overlooked. A protest is expected in Westminster tomorrow as farmers rally on Whitehall against the changes announced in last month's budget, while separately the National Farmers Union will hold a mass lobby of MPs in their efforts to get the government to rethink. Yesterday, the head of the farming union said that farmers are feeling betrayed about those changes to inheritance tax. And burglars raided the Windsor Castle estate while the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children reportedly slept nearby. The King and Queen were not in the residence. The Sun reported that the two men are said to have climbed a 6-foot fence at night and stole farm vehicles during that raid last month. They used a stolen truck to break through a gate said to be the nearest exit for the Prince, Princess and their children before targeting Shaw Farm, a working farm inside the estate. The pair remain at large. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 9 minutes past 2. And the President of the United States, Joe Biden, has approved the use of US long-range missiles by Ukraine to strike targets within Russia, a decision that's been warmly welcomed both by President Zelensky and those embattled Ukrainian troops.
However, the Kremlin has responded with fury at President Biden's decision, accusing Washington of throwing oil on the fire of the conflict.
Well, it all comes as the Ukrainian people continue to pay a heavy price in this conflict, with the death toll in the Russian airstrike on Odessa recently rising to 10, with a further 43 injured.
Well, we're now joined in the studio by GB News Home and Security editor Mark White. Mark, Russia up in arms about this latest development, but they're not averse to striking inside Ukraine.
No, of course, they're doing it every day, and yesterday was a particularly horrific day in terms of the Ukrainian people, where they saw more than 200 ballistic missiles and drones launched into all provinces in Ukraine, including that deadly strike in Odessa. And what we understand is that it was a ballistic missile targeting Odessa that was shot down by Ukrainian defence systems, but a significant proportion of that ballistic missile fell on a residential area, hence the very significant death toll that's coming out, with now 10 confirmed dead and more than 30 injured in that one strike alone.
It is, of course, quite perplexing, I think, to a lot of people that we've been given all of this equipment to the Ukrainians. We've been spending billions of pounds, and the Americans have been spending even more on sending all of this military equipment. But then we've been saying to Ukraine, you can't use this on the very sites that Russia uses to launch its own missiles. I mean, this is too little too late, is it not?
Well, it's certainly been a cause for deep frustration amongst the Ukrainian political class and indeed the military in that country, desperately trying to protect themselves from the continued incursion of the Russians. And at every step, every time they've wanted a new military technology to help in their aims of combating Russia, it's been argued over for month after month after month before eventually Western powers give in and give those, whatever the set piece of equipment it was, heavy-duty artillery to begin with, then tanks, then fighter jets. Now they're arguing over just how far into Russian territory these missiles can be launched. We know, of course, that Joe Biden in the United States has given permission for the ATACMS missiles that can reach about 200 miles just short of into Russian territory to go ahead. But we still await to see what will happen with the UK and Storm Shadow.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that. Mark White, for now, thank you very much. We're going to go straight to Rio de Janeiro now and speak to Christopher Hope, our political editor, because, Christopher, the summit is well and truly underway.
Hi, Tom. Yeah, welcome to Rio de Janeiro. Yeah, you're joining me at Christ the Redeemer statue. You can see it there. If John just spins round, you'll see the amazing view of a sun-drenched Rio de Janeiro here in Brazil. Now, we're at the G20, where world leaders are meeting. It's another week, another globe-trotting trip for our Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. Last week in Baku, 5,000-mile round trip. Now an 11,000-mile trip to Rio de Janeiro, meeting with world leaders. Now, so far, he's met with President Xi Jinping of China. That's a big moment, the first meeting face-to-face between the Prime Minister and the Chinese President for 6 years. It seems to me quite a positive meeting so far. The Chinese news agency tells us that the UK and China will be upholding their strategic partnership and open up new prospects in bilateral relations. For the UK, we hear that Sir Keir Starmer pressed a strong UK-China relationship. It's important for both countries, he said, and a full bilateral meeting is planned in Beijing or London for Sir Keir Starmer. So here you have our Prime Minister pressing the flesh, doing what we're trying to build alliances on a global stage. He's making the case here for controlling migration, for working closely on economic matters, but of course the big issue, the elephant in the room here, is the Ukraine war. And as Mark White was saying there so eloquently, we wait to see the UK to say it is supporting allowing these weapons to be fired, made by the UK and France, of course, being fired deep into Russian territory, possibly aiming at Russian troops and North Korean troops, and where that leaves the world community. It's a big moment here at the G20. Of course, it's a long way from freezing cold London, and of course tomorrow in London, farmers are marching against the inheritance tax measures brought in by this government. So we'll wait and see we'll be talking to the PM early tomorrow about that.
Oh, sorry, Chris. We heard a little bit of squabbling there to your left. Was that some of the monkeys that famously pervade that viewing platform? I was there last year, and there were hundreds of monkeys. I don't know if you're quite so swamped.
No, Tom, it's not a monkey. It was a man with a loud hailer. I'm not sure what he was shouting.
Typical for a political president. Chris, you've clearly got the difficult job there. My condolences. But on the topic of China, do you think this new approach to the Chinese was part of Labour's plan all the time, or have they been forced into this position by Trump's election victory and fear that tariffs could negatively impact trade for the UK?
I think it's quite common for a new government, Miriam, to try and test out where old relationships had failed. And you have heard, of course, Ian Duncan-Smith in the UK today saying that the UK is kowtowing to China. But clearly it's a very, very important relationship for the UK. It unravelled slightly under the last government. But there are big concerns, of course, about human rights violations by the Chinese government in part against the Uyghurs. We know concerns about about the Beijing crackdown in Hong Kong. They've been quite helpful towards trade with Russia when Russia's been a pariah since the invasion of Ukraine. And of course Taiwan is a lingering issue. But clearly Sir Keir Starmer sees a chance here as a newly elected Prime Minister to take a fresh look at an ongoing issue for the UK going back years. I mean, I was last in China with David Cameron, George Osborne over a decade ago. That was when we were reaching out to China. That went very wobbly under Theresa May and of course Boris Johnson. So it's a reset, I think, in that relationship, but I think we go into it as a country eyes wide open.
Theresa May. Under Theresa May, of course, we extracted the Chinese from all the investment they had in our nuclear power stations, all the rest of it. That was hugely expensive for us to do, but many people would argue for national security, it really mattered. I mean, it's going to be an easy win getting loads of Chinese money into the economy, for sure, but there is that big downside of who controls our infrastructure, who has the whip hand in the relationship. And crucially, Chris, this is coming at a time when the United States of America is veering away from China. We're now going to veer towards China. And as you say, have invited the Chinese president to London. That would be an extraordinary visit were that bilateral, that full formal bilateral meeting to take place.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. We're not sure whether that meeting will happen in London or Beijing. Also, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is likely to be going out towards Beijing for a bilateral with her counterpart in the Chinese government. So we are going to see, you're looking now at Christ the Redeemer. John, the cameraman, is very excited, like I am, to be here, looking above Rio. But it does seem an extraordinary place to be and covering politics for GB News. But that's right, yeah, a big, I think, issue there. I think we do go into it eyes wide open. I think a new government, a new elected government allows all cards back on the table. But as you heard there from Ian Duncan-Smith, big issues remain about China, and maybe this could be a chance to have both sides going back to basics and working out there's more that unites us than divides us, particularly on trade. But no question, in elements of the economy, we saw that with Huawei, didn't we, when they're involved in our 4G rollout. The UK government said this far and no further.
We are in the extraordinary position now, Christopher, where it does seem as though this incoming Labour government is more favourably disposed to the leader of the Chinese Communist Party than the leader of the US Republican Party.
Yes, as things stand, but of course Donald Trump is a pragmatic businessman, and we do expect him to try and go and visit people who have been necessarily anathema to the US recently. I think that's what happens. Any new government will re-look again, and we're seeing that with the Ukraine war and the issue of these missiles, and how the US and under Trump will re-examine that when they get in. But I think, yeah, it is interesting. I think it's done probably with US agreement, certainly on the security apparatus. Removing China from those sectors will be vital, but we do rely on them so much for trading, and I think that's why they're resetting it. I mean, Sir Keir Starmer does paint himself as an internationalist. He did, of course, say, didn't he, when he was leader of the opposition, he prefers it in Davos to Westminster. He is happy on the world stage. I mean, he's been away a lot. I think it's 22 days out of 77 since the beginning of September, by the end of this summit on Wednesday. And people in the UK may wonder why he's over here. I mean, now is the time to travel if you're a newly elected Prime Minister, because the election's a long way away. He's trying to make the case here for the UK internationally and re-engage on the world stage. So I can see why he's doing it, but I think, unlike before, we aren't naive about it now, Miriam. I think we go into it eyes wide open.
Now, Chris, there are a huge number of world leaders where you are, of course. The Prime Minister, we've just seen him sitting next to the representative from Saudi Arabia in a big round table. But how long is the Prime Minister going to stay there, and how much meaningful engagement can a summit like this actually achieve?
Yeah, the bilateral meetings, that's meetings head-to-head between the world leaders and the UK Prime Minister, haven't formally been confirmed, but we'll hopefully bring them to you throughout the day and tomorrow. But you're seeing there, I think, on your screens, images of a hunger plenary where Sir Keir Starmer's there. He may be sitting next to the Saudi leader. That will normally be because they sit according to alphabetical order. So maybe that may be why they are together. But yeah, we're going to be seeing, hopefully, and we're not sure who else they'll be meeting later. We can't confirm that on air yet, but they were meeting with allies. We could also hear, I think, later an update from the UK about what is happening with Ukraine, because, of course, it's reported authoritatively in the States that these missiles are being allowed to be fired by Ukraine deep into the heart of Russia, possibly at Russian or North Korean troops, around 8,000 North Korean troops there, of course, supporting Russia's war effort. We haven't yet heard formally from the French or the UK government. Hearing more later about that, and that has no question raised the temperature in an already boiling hot Rio.
OK, well, Chris Hope, thank you very much for joining us live from Christ the Redeemer. And might I just say, on the next exotic trip, shall we swap places?
Yes, it'll probably be to somewhere really cold next time.
Guess the Antarctic.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more to come on today's programme, including this ongoing row over free speech. People quivering at the prospect of a knock on the door from the police for a naughty tweet.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
In 2020, after almost 80 years, Oxford University's Pitt Rivers Museum removed its famous collection of shrunken heads with sewn-up lips and eyes made by the South American Shuar and Ashwar people. How do museums decide what should be shown and what should be confined to storage? Can controversial exhibits be left on display with suitable contextualisation in captions? Who would want to be a curator facing such controversial questions? For a review, I'm delighted to be joined by journalist Eitan Smallman. Welcome to GB News. I think many people, when they hear that we're going to discuss museums or art galleries, think that it's going to be, oh, that wokery question. But it strikes me, and I think it strikes you too, that this is not just about wokery at all. There are some really interesting ethical questions here. For example, I mean, let's start with this one, and there are several examples of it. Should we be displaying human bodies, the remains of human beings? Should we be displaying them in museums?
Absolutely. It's not just the usual suspects, young snowflakes, who are objecting to these things. There are just naturally cultural shifts, and people of all ages and all political persuasions may feel uneasy about displaying human remains of any kind, especially human remains that have been taken against the will of the communities or taken violently. Hilary Mantel led a campaign to remove a 7-foot 7-inch skeleton of Charles Byrne, known as the Irish Giant, from the Hunterian Museum. He had specifically said that he didn't want to be displayed and didn't want to be taken by anatomists, and yet was displayed for a couple of hundred years until a couple of years ago. He hasn't had the burial he requested, but he's no longer on public display.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 25 minutes past 2, and the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has urged police to focus on what matters most as Essex Police investigate columnist Alison Pearson over allegations of inciting racial hatred in a now-deleted tweet, which, to a casual-minded observer, might not have done.
Well, the incident has sparked heated debate over free speech and the enforcement of hate crime laws. Critics, including senior lawyers, argue the case falls far below criminal thresholds.
But what are those criminal thresholds and what are we allowed to say? Well, we're joined by the programme coordinator at the Battle of Ideas, Mo Lovett. Because, Mo, the police have been under a lot of criticism, of course, over the way that they've come and knocked on people's doors for what most people, most reasonable people, might think are various innocuous things. But aren't the police just acting on the legislation that we have in this country, whether it's the Communications Act or the Online Safety Act, all of these different, even the Public Order Act? They all cover, to varying degrees, what we are and are not allowed to say.
Yeah, absolutely, you're right. And of course, some of that legislation needs to be looked at if you're worried about the chilling effect this has on free speech. But actually,
the non-crime hate incidents was the brainchild of the College of Policing, which set up back in about 2014. And they argue that it's any action or any words that are clearly motivated by intentional hostility and run the real risk of escalating into a real crime. Obviously, we've seen many cases, including the Alison Pearson case, where that doesn't even apply. But let's take a step back from that as well, because let's look at how they are enacted, these non-crime hate incidents. So first of all, they're anonymised, so you can make a vexatious allegation against anyone. And if you perceive yourself to have been harmed, then that is reasonable grounds for somebody to be investigated. You don't have to provide any evidence, and you don't even have to provide any justification as to why it's a so-called hateful act. So instantly you can see this is an entirely subjective thing that's very open to vexatious complaints. The wording is that the person is called a victim, and the person who's maybe done the tweet or done whistle Bob the Builder in one incident at their neighbour are called the perpetrator. Now, this is before any judicial process has even happened. So it's entirely anti-democratic, as well as being a real affront to free speech. So I think we need to be looking at these very carefully. We've had High Court judges say that they're unlawful. Famously, in the Harry Miller case, that was one of the first ones where he'd retweeted a limerick that took the mickey out of the trans issue. And he won that case against homicide police. But even in the Court of Appeal, they said these are not lawful. And you can see they're not, because they're entirely subjective.
Well, as you say, a lot of this is entirely subjective. And we seem to have moved from a position in British law where a crime was committed by indisputable facts, so you steal something or you hurt somebody physically, to now it being entirely subjective. How does anybody know if your motive was hate or spite or whatever else? How can the police judge the motive of someone from a tweet?
Well, that's why people call it a thought crime, because obviously, if something's hateful, you have to, you have to prove that that person was intending to be hateful. Actually, with this, it's even worse, because you don't even have to prove it. You just have to feel hurt by it. So in so many ways, this is a real affront to democracy and to free speech. And as we've seen in the case of Alison Pearson, that she wasn't even told what her alleged offence was. And we've had 2,000 recorded cases of non-crime hate incidents against children. Yeah. Okay, and this stays on people's records. It can be revealed in an enhanced disclosure if you're applying for a job. You might not even know you've got one of these things on your name. You go to apply for a job and you don't get the job. You're probably not even told why you don't get the job. I mean, this really is quite Orwellian. We use that phrase all the time, but this genuinely is. And, Keir Starmer may have, sort of had a moment of conscience now, but let's not forget when Suella Braverman was Home Secretary, she told the College of Policing that they had to tighten up this. There had to be a real risk of escalation. When Yvette Cooper took the Home Office, she said she was going to dilute that, and she was going to adopt a zero-tolerance attitude to speech. So, I'm glad this has blown up in the way it has, and that people are seeing the ridiculousness of it. But we need to see some real action now, so that this stops happening to not just journalists, but ordinary people.
Well, thank you so much, Mo Lovett, for talking through those issues. I mean, it's a huge, huge concern that whenever we talk to anyone about, even politicians, they'll say, oh, how ridiculous this is. And then they won't do anything to change it. It's the most frustrating thing. But Mo Lovett of the Battle of Ideas, thank you so much for talking through it with us.
Well, I think that's the problem, Tom. To change it, you would need a repeal of an awful lot of legislation that's happened since 1997. Now, you could argue the last Conservative government absolutely should have done that. But there's no way this Labour government's going to do that.
No. I mean, I just find it extraordinary that...
a zero-tolerance attitude to speech.
Extraordinary.
Totally authoritarian.
I mean, we're the country of John Stuart Mill. Exactly. We basically invented free speech. And now, if your communication is deemed to be, quote-unquote, grossly offensive, under Section 127 of the Communications Act, you can be banged up. I mean, it's extraordinary.
It's not a crime to hate someone. It might be deeply unpleasant, and we teach our children not to hate people, but you can't legislate for whether people like, hate or are indifferent to somebody else.
But what we think of as these sort of traditional British values of, you know, free speech, of I respect your right to say whatever bloomin' heck you want to say. I'll defend the right. What is it? I'll defend to the death the right of you to say something.
Say something I disagree with.
Yeah, absolutely. But it seems that in legislation we don't have any of that. That's all in America now. We've exported that great idea and then forgotten it.
Well, because we have created this kind of web of not just legislation, guidance that even the police don't know how to interpret. And there are probably a lot of police trying to do their very best out there, but struggling with the legislation as it is and what may or may not be a crime. Very disturbing.
What do you think? Exercise your limited free speech rights at the GB News comments section, gbnews.com/your say. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and there's plenty more to come.
Well, a school sex education course in Scotland is being blamed for the rise in the number of young people questioning their gender identity or experiencing dysphoria. Should trans ideology be taught in schools? All that and much more after the news with Tatiana.
Miriam, thank you. The top story. Sir Keir Starmer says a strong UK-China relationship is important for both of our countries as he met Chinese President Xi Jinping on the fringes of the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. Sir Keir Starmer also suggested a full UK-China meeting in London or Beijing as part of his desire for consistent, durable, respectful ties between the two countries. Sir Keir Starmer became the first Prime Minister to meet the Chinese President since 2018. The UK has sanctioned Iran for aiding Russia's illegal war in Ukraine as the Foreign Secretary chairs the UN Security Council. Now that's as world leaders are at the G20 summit in Brazil. The Prime Minister says Ukraine is top of his agenda. Sir Keir Starmer says we need to double down on support for Ukraine as President Joe Biden's given the green light to Kyiv to use US-supplied long-range missiles to strike inside Russia. President Vladimir Putin warned the West they would be playing with fire if they allowed Ukrainian forces to launch Western-supplied missiles at Russia. It seems a move by North Korea to send thousands of its troops to fight with Russia has changed US calculations and forced the US president into making this decision. And burglars raided the Windsor Castle estate while the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children reportedly slept nearby. The King and Queen were not in the residence. The Sun reported that two men are said to have climbed a 6-foot fence at night and stole farm vehicles during the raid last month. They used a stolen truck to break through a gate said to be the nearest exit for the Prince, Princess and their children before targeting Shaw Farm. The pair remain at large. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. There's more news in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello, very good day to you. Here's your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office on what is going to be a fairly cold and perhaps wintry day for some of us. We do have some sunny weather around across northern parts today, and with that we have some cold air here. Further south and west it's a milder story but also quite a cloudier and wetter story, and as the wet weather across the south and west hits the colder air we are going to see something wintry later on. But for the time being, through this afternoon, lots of sunny skies across northern and eastern UK. Across the far north of Scotland, some wintry showers, some sleet or snow piling its way in. A cloudier story towards the south and west with quite a bit of rain around, but it is milder here. Temperatures for some peaking around 13 or 14 Celsius, only a few degrees above freezing towards the north and east. Now, as we head into this evening, there are a few things to watch out for. Across the north of Scotland, we will continue to see some wintry showers. These could become more of a thing overnight, so some hazards associated with these. A drier end to the day across southern Scotland and the far northeast of England, but we have that wet weather coming in from the southwest. That's going to bring some snow across parts of Northern Ireland and also across parts of northern England as we go through the end of today and overnight. It is likely to be quite disruptive for some places. We're talking potentially 20 20 centimetres above 200 to 300 metres. So some cities, Leeds, Sheffield, could see some disruptive snow overnight. Further south, there will be some wet weather around, but it's staying milder here. So I'm expecting it really just to be rain, with temperatures for some staying above 10 Celsius. But in the north, with some clear skies, a harsh frost, -8 perhaps. As we go through tomorrow, we are going to see a lot of the wet and wintry weather clearing away towards the east, so turning drier for many of us, but some rain continuing towards the southwest and further sleet and snow showers piling into northern Scotland. Temperatures will actually be dropping a little bit as we go through the day, so it is going to feel pretty chilly for many of us, despite there being some sunshine around. Bye-bye.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm John Vincent. We're seeing queues on the M90 southbound in Edinburgh at junction 1A for Kirkliston. Also queuing traffic in Carlisle for the A69 Warwick Road, travelling between the M6 roundabout and the Victoria Place traffic lights. Stop-start for the M25 clockwise in Hertfordshire due to an earlier broken down car in the roadworks just before junction 23 South Mims. Queues on the A1M northbound still in Hertfordshire due to an earlier accident just after junction 7 Stevenage South. We're seeing slow traffic on the Parkway southbound in Hayes just before junction 3 of the M4, and queues in Hampshire on the A31 westbound. There's a lane block due to an obstruction in the road between Stony Cross and Picket Post. And that's the latest traffic and travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain. It's 2:37 p.m. and there's lots more coming up today on our show. But before that, Martin Daubney is going to be up live at 3 p.m. Martin, I don't think you've been lucky enough to be sent to Brazil. But what's coming up in your show later on?
No, I normally get sent to Coventry. Me, anyway, on today's show, Jet Set Starmer enjoying his 10th foreign jolly as Prime Minister. They called him two-tier Keir. They called him free gear Keir. Now he's never here, Keir. What is it with these endless foreign jollies? Is it worth it? Is it a good look? While the farmers are taking to the streets of Britain. Talking of which, remember Maggie Thatcher, milk snatcher. Now they're calling the Prime Minister Keir Starmer, the farmer harmer. I'll be joined in the studio today by a farmer of 3 generations and his boy, who's just 12, wants to plough his father's furrow, but it's fearful that will not be possible under the inheritance tax grab. And also I'll be joined by the leader of a militant breakaway farmers union, who says they will not be told to keep calm by anybody who lives in a city. Plus 2 great talking points. Is it correct for teachers to wash school children's clothes? Well, there are schools across the north where they're putting laundrettes in because of hygiene poverty. Is that a good intervention or nanny state gone mad? And a British TikToker has caused outrage by saying, let's make Christmas Palestinian. No, let's not. Christmas is Christian. Leave it alone. It's a bit like saying, let's make Eid British. Whoops, that'll be a hate crime. In fact, here come the police now. Coming in 3 till 6.
Oh, fascinating one, Martin. Of course, Jesus did come from that part of the world, but it wasn't called Israel back then. I think it was pretty
the Roman
Jewish.
protectorate of Palestine, I think.
Well, there we go. Martin, we'll look forward to that at 3 o'clock.
Well, coming up now, is Scotland's sex education leading to a rise in transgender children? While critics are accusing the nation's controversial sexual health programme of causing a rise in transgender children. According to reports in The Times, there's been a suggestion that a rapid rise in the number of young people questioning their gender identity or experiencing gender dysphoria is down to what is being taught in schools.
Well, joining us now is the author of When Kids Say They're Trans, Stella O'Malley. Stella, what's your view on this?
Well, I don't think anybody could dispute that there hasn't been a very sharp rise in the number of especially teenagers seeking medical transition and seeking to be present as a different identity. And there has been also a sharp rise in social media in the presence of LGBTQ identities. But as well as that, it coincides with a lot of gender identity theory being taught in schools. And it has impacted kids, because when you teach children that they can easily become something else. For example, a girl can become a boy or become non-binary. That's very powerful for a teenager who is idealistic by their very nature, teenagers are, and also open to all sorts of what am I going to be, because identity exploration is an integral part of being an adolescent. So I think it's very important that if schools want to teach something, they have their facts right. They make sure that they're correct. And if they're teaching a theory, they teach it as a theory, not a fact.
Stella, one of the documents being blamed for what's happening in Scottish schools is a document produced by the Scottish Government a couple of years ago now called Supporting Transgender Young People in Schools, which was guidance. And it says it gives certain advice that actually looks very out of date now in light of the Cass review. So telling teachers that if a child comes out as transgender, they should use whatever pronouns they seek to be used. And if PE classes are organised by sex, a transgender young person should be allowed to take part within the group which matches their gender identity. Do you think, in light of the Cass review, it's time that the Scottish schools updated their guidance?
Well, worse than that, they need to withdraw their guidance, because the Cass review has shown how this impacts young people. To call it transgender young people is immediately showing their lack of information, because these are children who might be gender non-conforming, they might be gay, they might be lesbian, they might have conditions such as autism or ADHD. There's a lot going on with these young people who are seeking to identify as another gender. To call them transgender is concretising their identity in a premature fashion, and it's labelling them and also setting them on a medical path that leads to sexual dysfunction, it leads to infertility, and leads to a host of other health complications. It's a heavy burden on the body. And so it's an outdated, but not only is it an outdated, it's a pretty dangerous guidance, that guidance. So they should withdraw it, they should inform themselves, educate themselves, read the Cass review and maybe read it a second time, and then they should, if they want to, create a different guidance that actually serves the needs of young people who are undergoing identity exploration, and let them free to be kids so that they are free to have a free future, so that they can explore lots of things without concretising on one specific identity.
Of course, the Cass review is a good starting point for all of the discussions off the back of this, but is there a risk that withdrawing any sort of guidance for schools, and particularly what's been termed in the press as gender ideology, that could boil down to simply saying there are trans people in this country and they exist and they're trans? Is there a risk that, as we saw with Section 28 back in the 1980s and 1990s, that stopping the promotion of homosexual ideology actually made books be removed from school library shelves, had people afraid to say even gay people existed in the country? Is there a risk that actually, in trying to go for what was quite a balanced approach in the Cass review, things could go far too far the other way?
Yeah, there is always a risk that people kind of too far east is west and people swing back. But, you know, Section 28, it wasn't homosexual ideology. It was the facts around
promotion of homosexuality.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So there is a difference, because trans ideology arguably rests on a theory, and so it is an actual ideological belief system. I think it's very important to kind of discern what somebody means by the word trans. Some people, most people, I certainly mean trans to mean somebody who is medically transitioned. Now, to say that as somebody who's gender non-conforming is a completely misnomer. So to support gender non-conformity could be an interesting thing to do. So they could bring back out a guidance. I wasn't saying get rid of guidance. I was saying get rid of that guidance, because it's badly titled. If they created a guidance about supporting non-conformity in schools, perhaps wouldn't have to be gender non-conformity, because there's also lots of different ways to be non-conforming, so that people can free themselves up a little bit. There's been a kind of obsession around trans issues in schools, and it has led to a lot of people, young people, thinking that they can do things that maybe it will make them happy, when actually maybe there's lots of ways to be non-conforming. There's lots of ways to explore your identity. And if people could kind of free up without shaming, and I'm not talking about hiding information, and certainly people need to know certain aspects of, you know, sexual orientation. I think it could be helpful at this stage to learn about gender identity theory, but at the same time they should learn about developmental theory, so that they realise some people have a very different view of how somebody might seek medical transition, and it's often to do
So I suppose the question with that would be, though, what age is appropriate? Because having a discussion amongst sixth formers, for example, about what is gender identity ideology, why might biologists disagree, what are the political implications, is one thing. But to tell an 8, 9 or 10-year-old, oh, if you're uncomfortable in your body, maybe you're not a boy, you're a girl, that's obviously a completely different way of discussing gender ideology that many parents would be deeply uncomfortable with.
That's such a good point. There's a reason why we don't teach Shakespeare to 6-year-olds, because if we did, they would mangle their understanding of it and would ruin the experience. They wouldn't quite get it. They'd get a bad understanding and they'd never again get the opportunity for the beauty of learning about Shakespeare. Equally, if you're going to teach somebody about sex and relationships and other aspects of being a human, it has to be age appropriate or you're wrecking it. And so I think we're coming in too fast, too early. And also, frankly, I'm very uncomfortable with teachers or people from, frankly, paid profit-making organizations that have an agenda and that want to teach children their way of thinking about the world, when I might have a different view of relationships. I might have a different view of how to have a healthy relationship. So I think certainly we need the bare bones, and we know what sex education is, but there's an overreach going on in schools when actually the level of education in schools is really quite unimpressive these days. We need to get the literacy up, but also we need people with a better education, better critical thinking, better English language skills. There's so many other things that need to be taught urgently before the nuances and depth and kind of extreme detail oriented around the LGBTQ plus gender identities.
Well, Stella O'Malley, thank you so much for joining us here on Good Afternoon Britain. Appreciate your time.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up on today's show. The Met Office has issued yellow weather warnings for snow and ice. We're GB News, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
We shot with the London Eye in the background, so it's quite an iconic shoot to do my cover of the Playboy magazine.
And you moved into the mansion for a while. Hugh called you the British Carmen Electra. You were one of his favourites, and it's renowned for its parties, of course, over there. You must have had a few of those. Must have been wild times.
Fantastic parties, yeah. I mean, I met some incredible people. I will forever respect him and everyone at Playboy for the love and the support.
And you were on giant billboards, you were modelling for Nike, for Reebok, you're earning thousands of pounds a day.
Wow.
Absolutely like living the dream in terms of a model's lifestyle, and then things began to change.
Well, I've been living in Windsor for 4 years, and I can't get back into Windsor at the moment. The rents have gone ridiculous. I was paying $550 a month, and then the landlord just turned around one day and said I need to be paying $750. And I didn't really have a proper tenancy agreement, and I looked through it and I said, oh, can we get something in writing? And he was like, oh. So in the end, I wrote a tenancy agreement out from off the internet and I got it all signed. But then he went, if you're not going to pay the extra £250 a month, then you're going to have to move out. And I was like, well, you're going to have to give me 4 weeks. I can't just move out. I've got nowhere to go. And I think he thought he could just throw me out there and then. And he said, I've got someone that's going to move in that's going to pay £700-800 a month. So I went and got the 10, and I thought maybe this will be the way I can go for a few months or so, and it was still summer a few months back when I became homeless. So, I got the tent and I got all the cooking equipment and what have you from the money I got from some of the jobs I did. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna go and be a free spirit for a bit, and I'm gonna have to just do my own thing. And you know what, it was the biggest mental relief to be able to have my own space. I mean, that was so liberating, absolutely.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits. Chemistry, Tonight is electric. As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon. Britain has just gone 10-3 and the UK is facing severe wintry conditions, with the Met Office issuing a difficult-to-pronounce yellow weather warning for snow and ice.
Well, up to 20 centimetres of snow is expected, leading to potential power cuts, travel delays and icy roads.
Rural areas may become isolated and commuters should anticipate disruptions well into Tuesday morning. The cold snap brings freezing temperatures and overnight frosts, with forecasters advising the public to prepare with extra supplies and, of course, check vehicle safety.
Well, let's find out more from our weather journalist, Nathan Rao. Nathan, very interesting forecast, perhaps some early wintry weather here. How likely is it to be as predicted?
Well, it was the coldest night of the year last night, with -7.8 at Tulloch Bridge in Scotland. If you were further south, you might still be wondering what all the fuss is about, but it's still quite mild. But it is tonight, or later on this afternoon and tonight, that really cold Arctic air is going to come right down over the whole of the UK. And it's where it bumps into that milder air to the south through this evening and into tomorrow that we are looking at the risk of snow. And that is where the Met Office have issued the snow warnings for. There's a yellow warning, as you said, for up to 8 inches of snow over higher ground, 4 inches of snow over lower ground, and that's over Scotland, northeast, northwest England, the Midlands, Wales, and parts of central England tonight and into tomorrow morning, which is when they're looking at the disruption. But absolutely certainly a real taste of winter quite early on as we buckle up and wrap ourselves up for the first proper snowfall of the year.
No, it is a huge concern, I suppose, for many people, but for others it could be a delight to see some snow. I mean, how regularly do we actually get this sort of snow? I seem to think that we actually get it more around Easter than we do around Christmas these days.
Pretty much.
Yeah. You're absolutely right, Tom. In fact, it's more likely to see a white Easter than it is to see a white Christmas. However, this time last year, I don't know if you can cast your minds that far back, we had another really, really cold snap in November. We had a few flurries of snow. I don't seem to remember it being quite as bad as this is anticipated to be. Further south, the snow is not really going to be an issue. But in terms of the accumulations, it's going to be central England and northern England. And that's going to last right through the end of the week, with this risk of cold air coming down from the Arctic with temperatures sub-zero right across the UK, and milder air coming in from the Atlantic. It's where you get the clash of the two that you get the snowfall. So I would expect the Met Office's warnings for snowfall to evolve through the coming days. In fact, the Met Office warnings for snow earlier in the week have been upgraded today to reach further across the UK. They were originally just for Scotland. Now they've gone down to central England, and I'd expect that to be an evolving picture. The difficult thing is when you get milder air coming in from the Atlantic, meeting a cold Arctic blast, which is what we're getting, it's quite difficult to pinpoint where that snow will actually land. So that is what the Met Office forecast is going to be looking at. It's also worth noting that the UK Health Security Agency has also upgraded a cold weather health alert, and that is really an indication of the health risks.
Nathan,
to elderly,
I'm afraid we're
people.
going to have to leave it there, but let's hope you're right, because I do love a bit of snow, and I do remember those days off school when we were little, too deep snow to go into school today, so let's hope it comes true. But everybody stay safe. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on Good Afternoon Britain. We'll be back tomorrow.
And of course, it's Martin up next, so don't go anywhere. Thanks for watching.
See you tomorrow.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Here's your latest GB News weather update, brought to you by the Met Office. There's some pretty cold weather across parts of the UK at the moment, and with that, there's the risk of some disruptive snow as we go through the next 24 hours, because a frontal system is going to push in and bump into the cold air currently across many northern parts, leading to the rain turning to snow. Already as we go through the end of the afternoon, some snow over higher ground of Northern Ireland, but it's across parts of northern England where we're likely to see the greatest disruption from the snow, potentially 20 centimetres of lying snow above some higher ground, even a little bit to lower levels potentially. Further north, some wintry showers for northern Scotland, some clearer skies across other parts of Scotland, leading to a harsh frost here. Temperatures perhaps falling as low as -8, but it's a milder, albeit cloudier and perhaps damp story further south. As we go through tomorrow morning then, those wintry showers could bring a bit of sleet, bit of snow, also some icy patches, so some difficult conditions first thing. A drier story though across more central and southern parts of Scotland. And by the morning, most of the wet and wintry weather will have cleared through Northern Ireland, and it will be clearing away from parts of northern England too. Further south, it's a milder start to the day. There will be some outbreaks of rain, but again, most